2018 was the beginning. From podcast to live events, Fight Night Picks was off and running.
Do you typically train for a fight with a specific game plan in mind, or do you train for a certain opponent?
Honest to God, I always have the same game plan.
A year later, a new ad.
The cringe fest continues with Henry Cejudo. He pulled out a snake today. No clue.
Since then, it's been a wild ride. 2022 shaping up to be another crazy year.
Hurt Chandler. He might be peacocking right now. I think that left hook hurt.
Whoa! Big time right hands, Michael Chandler!
Oh, they've both been hurt this week.
Oh!
So as they say, let's get into it.
Big time card coming up this weekend with Fight Night Picks in UFC 271. We have a rematch years in the making between Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker for middleweight glory. As always, one half your host and duo, Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. With me to my left, to your right, as always, Matt Allen on the respective socials at Matt Allen FNP. We make it very easy for you, just like it was last weekend. I mean, hey, on Fight Night Picks #kicks, the QMK parlay hit. That was a three-legger. We were in the plus 170 range on that one. A lot of fun, but a big-time weekend that was, and we're also able to hit that big-time goal of 30,000 subscribers. So a slow golf clap for you, because you guys run the show here. You guys make this happen, and we certainly appreciate all the support that we've had. You unlock the Dana White's Contender Series breakdowns. They'll happen later on this year. Obviously, we have the Ultimate Fighter starting up at the end of the spring into the summer, so we'll see when Contender Series happens. But when we focus at the task at hand, a big-time pay-per-view card, a lot of great prospects on this one for Adesanya. A couple of teammates in the mix. You've got Carlos Ulberg at light heavyweight. You have the UFC debut of Mike Mathetha, a.k.a. Mike Diamond, a.k.a. the most aggressive nickname in all of MMA, Blood Diamond. He's going to be taking on Jeremiah Wells. Also the UFC debut of A.J. Dobson. This guy is like a phoenix rising, coming off a Contender Series, an absolute finisher with a lot of experience, pro and amateur. I'm excited about so many of the prospects on this card, but like I said, this pay-per-view portion's really stacked. 9 ranked fighters on the card in addition to your champion. I mean, what more could you ask for?
Normally we do talk about star-level fighters, or sort of those all-star level superstar fighters. Israel Adesanya is one of those guys, of course. And it's very rare that those fighters find themselves in rematches, because when you're a big star, the UFC, okay, what's the next big thing we can do? I'm so happy Robert Whittaker is getting his opportunity. He has showed improvement since their first fight. And no one else in the division, at least up until this point, has shown that, okay, I'm more deserving than Robert Whittaker, because he himself has been sending back every, I guess, next in line sort of fighter. So I think this is a phenomenal main event that we have ourselves this weekend, and it is a very deep card top to bottom. I know we were talking before about how, the first pay-per-view of the year, 2 title fights, they were great, they were exciting, but that's really all that card had to offer. This only has 1 title fight, but I know we're both so excited for all 15 fights on this card.
Let's throw it on over to our Fight of the Night screen, as always presented by your ad here. Listen, we're looking for sponsors. You want to join the team? Let us know. You can hit us up. Again, Twitter,
We
Instagram.
like energy drinks.
We like energy drinks, and we like to have a good time, and there's experience with major sponsors. So we'll throw it on over to the Fight of the Night screen, because we've got a couple that might fly under the radar.
Let us know down below in the comment section who you've got. It's time for the Fight of the Night with Fight Night Picks.
And when it comes to a possible fight of the night where you're at, it could be right there, we have Martinez taking on Ronnie Lawrence. And these guys love to throw down. For Martinez, makes his UFC debut, bit of a heavy heart, missed weight, and due to that fact, he ended up having a split decision against Guido Canetti, but ultimately lost the first round. Second round he won. Third round he pulled away.
Hey, no one knows how good Guido Canetti is more than us on this channel. I think we sing that guy's praises more than anybody in the MMA world.
Oh, Guido, he's a tricky southpaw. He's over 40. And for Martinez, that was his first decision, and all of his other 8 fights have ended by knockout, where he was victorious. And for Ronnie Lawrence, this guy just puts the wrestling shoes on every single time he comes out, and if he doesn't, he's one of the more unorthodox strikers you will find at bantamweight. I think this one has fireworks all over it.
I couldn't agree more. Like, these guys might not be the most technical fighters on this card, but this fight's gonna be awesome because they both come to finish fights. Neither guy's going in there thinking, okay, if Saldi Amato's the judge, maybe I can slay him at the end of this. These are 2 proven finishers who are gonna go in there realizing how big of an opportunity this is on such a massive card to sort of make a name for themselves. So I think this is going to be one of those surprise sleeper picks that everyone will be talking about.
Absolute banger at bantamweight. And in our second choice, another absolute banger at bantamweight, we have Kyler Phillips take on Marcelo Rojo. And listen, you might be a little down on these two guys because for Kyler Phillips, he lost his last fight against Raulian Paiva, but did he really lose it? Because he had the 10-8 in the first round and then he kind of just emptied the chamber, was tired in round 2 and round 3. Ultimately, Paiva ends up winning that one, but it was a very back and forth fight. And if you look at it for Marcelo Rojo, you want to talk about back and forth fights. Look at the way that guy's eyes looked at the end of his last one against Charles Jourdain. On short notice, the call-up, the former Combate star. This guy has a lot of experience. I mean, hey, he's got a fight, might be a loss, against John Castaneda, who looked amazing last weekend. I think this is going to be a great fight because these two guys rarely ever take a step back.
I couldn't agree more. And remember all the way back in UFC Undisputed 2? I know we're going a ways back in this one. I think Brock Lesnar was on the front of it. When they had that like weird sort of cringy promo where it's like Chuck Liddell, so you want to be a fighter? And then there'd be like the light going through. Show people the picture of Marcelo Rojo's face after his last fight and tell me you still want to pursue a career in MMA. Because like in baseball, if you go 0 for 3, it sucks. It's embarrassing. But you're fine to go the next day. You can still play and you're still going to feel pretty good the next day. In MMA, like, you play baseball, you play basketball, you don't play fighting, and I really do think that this is going to be such a fun fight, because like you said, Kyler Phillips seems to show some moment in every single fight where you're like, wow, if you could just string together 5 or 6 more of these, we've got ourselves a top 10, not only contender, but just a long-time top 10 contender, so I think this will be a really fun fight.
Big-time fight in that bantamweight division, and that division is absolutely on fire, so you're not going to want to miss either of those two fight of the night picks, and listen, if you are a big-time advertiser, hey, check it out right there. Hit us up in the emails, in the Twitters, on the Instagrams. We are here to have a good time and party. Listen, big time fights coming up this weekend. And listen, we throw it out to you guys, the fans, because again, you guys are the engine that kind of turns the show, if you will. And we hit over 30K. You've unlocked Dana White's Contender Series breakdowns. We throw it out on Instagram, on Twitter, and in the YouTube community tab about voting for some of these thumbnails. You got a couple of competing ones this weekend. Ultimately, number 2 is the winner.
I gotta say something though. I thought number 1 was awesome.
I think number 1's pretty cool as well. So we're gonna throw it out there for the individual fight video. But listen, we're trying to get a little bit creative, kind of getting a little bit crazy here. But it's a lot of fun. So make sure you check out all that great stuff. The big time fights that are coming up this week. We're also going to have early stoppage. We're going to have question mark kicks. Now, people get a little tripped up on that one. QMK, the QMK parlay, it's 2 hours before the prelims here on YouTube. You can check it out here. We also have the fight companion coming out for this pay-per-view. Just the main card portion, but you can tune in, tune off the rest of the commentary that's out there, sync up. And listen, we're here to have a good time. I can't wait for it.
Think how good of a main card we get to cover, too. We're going to be doing Nasrat Haqparast, Bobby Green as the opener for the pay-per-view. That fight is going to be amazing. Kyler Phillips, Marcelo Rojo. We just had that as a potential fight of the night. And then you move into Cannonier Brunson, Tuivasa Lewis, and then, of course, the phenomenal main event being Adesanya Whittaker II. I couldn't think of a better way to spend a Saturday night than hanging out with us watching some MMA.
Matt's going to work through the voice like our father, John Franklin. We'll see how that one goes for the rest of the show, but I can't wait for it. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it. Coming up this weekend, we have the latest and greatest from City Kickboxing. Now, you might get a little tripped up with the name, so let me help you out a little bit. It could end up as Mike Mathitha. It could end up as Mike Diamond, which sounds like a name that you might find on like a late night movie channel, you know, past midnight, and they get into some of that softcore stuff. Or then it goes hardcore as it gets with Blood Diamond. We have Blood Diamond making his UFC debut, taking on Jeremiah Wells. And if you want to talk about a short notice debut going incredibly well, for Jeremiah Wells, when he took on former Ultimate Fighter Great Warley Alves, a man who's beaten Colby Covington in the UFC.
Finished him, too.
Jeremiah Wells finished Warley, and it wasn't a Warley Alves like we've seen in the past where is he one step in, one step out. In that fight, Jeremiah just put his foot to the floor and looked very, very good. He really pushed a great pace, threw some great strikes, but we're not really here to talk about that just yet, because for Blood Diamond, this is a guy that's fought with Glory Kickboxing, and I went through and I watched some of his kickboxing fights. I watched some of the King of the Ring stuff, and it's kind of funny because if you look at it for Blood Diamond, he's done a little bit of King of the Ring. Carlos Ulberg, he's done a little bit of King of the Ring. They're all city kickboxing guys, a little bit of the New Zealand connection. But when I looked at it for Mike Matitha or Blood Diamond, in the last fight that I watched in kickboxing, 52-14 was his kickboxing record with 17 knockouts, taking on a guy in Copy who was 15-15. So I took everything with a little bit of a grain of salt, but for Blood Diamond, great kickboxing in the back pocket. And when you really do focus on it, this is a guy that came from Zimbabwe over to New Zealand. I mean, he puts on impressive performances when he's inside the cage. And yes, he only does have the 3 fights as a pro in MMA, which is a huge red flag because even last weekend we had a guy who was quote-unquote 4-0, depending on if you count 3-round exhibition fights on The Ultimate Fighter, but I'm talking about Tresean Gore. Now for Gore, I think overconfidence really kind of got the best of him because he was talking about becoming a 2-division champion.
I think lack of cardio did.
And a lack of output as well. But when it comes to Blood Diamond, this is a guy where lack of output is not going to be a problem for him in the UFC.
No, exactly. And that's a really nice thing to see from a high-level striker because it feels like a lot of high-level strikers come over and then rely a lot on their power. Now, you normally think, okay, if they're so high-level, they would actually be able to set things up, but it's always this weird sort of dynamic you have when you have these primary strikers coming over to MMA because, of course, they're going to be better at striking than 98% of the people who they fight. But you do sort of have to deal with those backdoor demons, if you will, of like, hey, what happens if my opponent shoots for a takedown? Like, you have to react to everything a lot differently than just somebody who can go in there who might not be as good of a striker, but has really good wrestling defense, so they can at least defend some of those initial takedown attempts. What I really like from Blood Diamond, he can throw kicks moving backwards, which is really weird because he is light on his feet. And this is the big point I wanted to bring up in this video because, like you said, there's a number of city kickboxing fighters on this card. And a lot of people probably think, oh, well, they're from the same gym. These fighters must fight in a similar style. But that's not really the case because when you look at the top of the card in Israel Adesanya, he is kind of like the best version out there. Let's just call it what it is. He can strike from both stances. He can move both directions. He can basically do everything from an ambidextrous standpoint. With Blood Diamond, he's more mobile than Israel, and I'd say he moves a little bit better than him, but he is one of these weird strikers, and this is kind of how I'm going to bring it back to you. When you do have somebody who has such little experience in MMA, coming over at 3-0, like, I don't really know what the initial, like, is this a good matchup for Blood Diamond, do you think, coming over? Because it is so hard to tell. Like, do we have, like, an Alex Pereira level striker coming in right now? Well, no, I don't think so. Like, Blood Diamond's definitely good, don't get me wrong, but I don't necessarily look at him as, like, the pinnacle of kickboxing, so I'm just curious to see how those skills are going to translate.
Originally, this matchup was supposed to be Blood Diamond against Orion Kosi, which even that's a weird matchup, too, because Kosi didn't finish his fight well, I guess. I mean, he got finished in his last fight, but he had a pretty good first round against Philip Rowe, and Philip Rowe looked great last weekend. So when it comes to Kosi in a fight with Blood Diamond, I would figure, okay, we're going to try and get him up against the cage. We're going to try and take him down, which if you look at it for Blood Diamond, his last fight against Dims Gillies, that was kind of the MO. And listen, Blood Diamond was able to pull away. He did win that fight 29-28, 29-28, 30-27, and I have a lot to say about that fight because that's the only good sample size we've gotten out of Blood Diamond in MMA. If you look at it for the other fights that he's had, they've been finishes. He gets a TKO win over Joe Van Duyn, who was 1-2 4 years and 8 months ago. He got a win 2 years and 6 months ago over Hyun-Min Hwang, where Hyun-Min, I mean, listen, he was making his pro debut. Blood Diamond gets it down to the mat, and his opponent looked completely lost, rolled into the rear naked choke. I even looked at it like body type wise. I don't bring that into a lot of fights, but at the division they were at of welterweight, like there was a lot of extra pounds. He really did look like a lightweight, but in that one, credit to Blood Diamond for getting the rear naked choke. He was positionally aware enough once he had the back to get the submission. I did like actually what I saw out of him on the mat because he was from a side control. His opponent rolls. He ends up getting it. It was nice. But then when it comes to the striking, and I look at that Dims Gillies fight, and this is the other weird thing about Blood Diamond coming into the UFC. His last fight was a year and 10 months ago. Why are we waiting this long to get a fighter like this in the UFC? It seems like weird timing. And listen, he threw it out there. I think it was on Instagram quite a while ago that he had the contract. It was just a matter of getting him here. But if we really focus on it, and I focus on your question, his striking is different. Like, it's different than a lot of guys I've seen in MMA because He's a southpaw, and he starts the first round in the Dimps Gillies fight as a southpaw. And you hear the commentary go, this guy's left-hand dominant, and he will tend to go orthodox. And I thought, oh, well, Dustin Poirier's like that. He will switch stances or start in the opposite stance, but he's better with his lead hand. So for Blood Diamond, coming out of southpaw, he throws kicks from weird angles, he throws punches from weird angles, and something that I had on my notes for him, he holds his hands when he defends like a guy going to brush cut with a steel brush cutter up in Canada. Wow. He holds his hands like out and down like this, and it's different. They're not back, they're not high, they're just kind of out, and they're a little bit bent. It's just totally different, but I like the combinations that he throws when he throws a combination, but it doesn't happen a lot. It is a lot of single shot, reset, walk forward, reset, back up. I'll throw a kick. He must have the most flexible hips in this division. Wild. It's absolutely insane. There are some periods of inactivity. He's got very good power. He's hittable. Dimps Gillies was able to hit him quite a bit.
He is, but this is the way I kind of see this fight going. I think Blood Diamond is going to have a really good chance to win this fight. Again, we bring this up sometimes, how the UFC is a lot more like boxing, or just the entity of boxing, than we probably like to admit. And they have a guy whose nickname is Blood Diamond, who has a very, very exciting fighting style. They probably want that guy to win. But this is the problem. If he gets taken down one time, I don't know what he's going to look like against somebody of Jeremiah Wells. And it's not like Wells is one of the best grapplers in this division, but he can hold guys down, and he has good top pressure, and he can finish with submissions if he needs to. And when you're fighting someone who is such a pure striker, and listen, like Giga Chikadze is a pure striker, right? But he can at least grapple a little bit, and we've seen that area of his game. With Blood Diamond, there just are so many question marks to where I feel like I almost have to pick against him in this fight, but this is the one where it's like, okay, depending on what the outcome is in this matchup, that'll sort of set the precedent for how I see him in the future.
So if we look at the odds for this fight, Jeremiah Wells opened to minus 200, he's a minus 230, and I haven't talked a lot about Jeremiah Wells yet, and I will, and if you look at it for Blood Diamond, opened to plus 170, he's plus 185, and kind of going back through my notes, watching that Dimps Gillies fight where you get all of that experience, the one thing I really didn't like is when Blood Diamond decided to throw big-time powerful strikes, he missed on them, and it expends a lot of energy. He was throwing spinning wheel kicks. He threw 3 in the first round, 2 in the second round. They didn't hit. And then at one point, he throws like a spinning back kick, and it lands, and it really hurts his opponent. But again, there were periods in that fight where Blood Diamond was rocked quite a bit. Now, where I do think he's going to be able to capitalize, the fact that Jeremiah Wells is a aim big, miss big type of guy. And I showed it in, and again, Jeremiah Wells was supposed to fight not that long ago. He was bounced out of his last fight. So if you do look at it for Wells, we had a video where he was supposed to take on Jake Matthews back in December that we just kind of had to scrap. And originally, he was supposed to take on Tim Means last week. So for Jeremiah Wells, my big point of fight against Jake Matthews was the fact that he throws winging punches almost with his eyes closed and takes a lot of liberties. Now, in his last fight against Warley Alves, he did that, and then he connected, and then Warley went down. So he was able to do that. But you brought up a really good point that I don't think a lot of people are going to focus on in this fight. Yes, Blood Diamond's kickboxer, you got to take him down. Jeremiah Wells has really powerful grappling. It's a focal point of his game. He comes out of Henzo Gracie, Philly with Sean Brady, Jonathan Pati's out of that gym. There's a lot of great fighters there. But the biggest part of Jeremiah Wells' game when he goes to take you down that Dimps Gillies wasn't able to do in Blood Diamond's last fight, when he gets you up against the cage, he goes for body lock takedowns, and he has a giant upper body for a guy that's 5'9" in this division. I think that's really going to help him out in a fight.
I couldn't agree more. And the thing about Blood Diamond is that even if you think he has good cardio for his striking on the feet, if he grapples for even 2 minutes, that cardio is going to get worse and worse and worse. And I do worry about his ability to go out there and get knockouts, especially later on in the fight. Like, I think he'd go, let's say he gets a Shavkat Rakhmonov wheel kick into a ground and pound knockout. I wouldn't be surprised at all because that's how good of a striker he is. But there's also the other side of that where he misses a wheel kick, gets taken down, gets mounted and ground and pound. So I do like Jeremiah Wells, at least for his MMA game in this matchup.
I've got Jeremiah Wells in this fight, and if I was going to hedge it, I'd probably say a Blood Diamond, a quick knockout. I wouldn't see it as the fight goes on, maybe round 1. But for me, I like the experience of Jeremiah Wells. Again, it comes down to a guy who has, 12 pro fights to a guy that has 3 in MMA. Again, the losses for Wells, Vinicius de Jesus, and Manny Wallo. And then you look at the other guys. He beat John Manley. John Manley's fought in Bellator. He's fought around the UFC. And this is a guy that has really good CFFC experience. I mean, listen, he was the welterweight champ over there. And you look at the names that have been thrown around. He was supposed to take on Miguel Baeza at one point, Jake Matthews, and Tim Means. That speaks to how highly the UFC views a guy like Jeremiah Wells.
Bobby Nash.
Bobby Nash.
He went 0-3 with 3 knockout losses.
The guy was a gamer. But in this fight, we're both going with Jeremiah Wells. But I'll tell you what, I can't wait for the debut of Blood Diamond. It should be absolutely amazing. Let us know down below in the comment section who you have in this fight. And for the rest of the City Kickboxing fighters, we got Carlos Ulberg coming up next and Israel Adesanya taking on Robert Whittaker in the main event. So keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say.
Let's get into it.
Absolute banger. Coming up this weekend in the bantamweight division, we have not one, but 2 of my guys facing off against one another. We have the former M1 Global bantamweight champ, Sergey Morozov, representing Kazakhstan. And listen, Kazakhstan, stand up. They had a big weekend last weekend with the win of Shavkat Rakhmonov on the main card of that fight night, getting the win over Carlston Harris, and that guy is a force to be reckoned with. At welterweight, Morozov looking to make a name for himself and continue with his winning ways. He was unsuccessful against Umar Nurmagomedov in his debut. He was a giant underdog. He was in the realm of a plus 400, but his last time out took on Khalid Taha, and he was able to really enforce the game plan that he had over with M1 Global. And if you like a Morozov fight, it's going to get dirty. It's going to get gritty. He's going to strike to clinch to take you down. And once he's got you down, you're in a lot of trouble. Now, he's taking on one of the most interesting men in MMA in Douglas Silva de Andrade. And if I could give him a nickname that's not D Silva, it would be the Henri Richard nickname. And I don't know if Douglas has a brother, but his older, bigger brother would be Vitor Belfort. So he is, by proxy, the pocket rocket. And it's not like a soft core type of thing. Wow. But this guy is one of my favorite fighters to watch, and I'm not even joking. Matt, you know how excited I get about a D Silva fight.
He's just so explosive at 36 years of age. And I know we talk about, the lighter weight classes, you've got to worry about them when they get, 33, 34, 35. Silva de Andrade, like, hold my beer. I don't get tired. I don't get old. I'm still the same fighter I've always been. And it has been interesting because you look at him and his fighting style, everything he does requires a massive amount of energy. He's not somebody who works behind the jab, really settles into a fight. But he does have pretty good staying power at this stage of his career for being so old in the division.
And if you look at it for D Silva, 20 of his 27 pro wins by knockout, which is insane.
Check yourself before you wreck yourself.
The craziest part is, too, you'd think an older guy, you're going to start to have trouble making the weight, but making the weight's never truly been an issue on the scale for D Silva. However, he's had 6 fights at bantamweight in the UFC. I got to talk about some of these names because you look at his last fight, he took on a credentialed kickboxer in Gaetano Perello and knocked him dead with a hook. And it was over in the first round incredibly quickly. But I mean, 4-2 in the UFC at bantamweight, and he has some fights at featherweight. His debut against Zubair Tukhugov, that's a tough one. And that was back in 2014, mind you. He has a win over the greatest bantamweight of all time, not Dominic Cruz, Renan Barão. He has a win over Renan Barão at featherweight and a loss to Lerone Murphy, which I think very highly of Lerone Murphy. So again, play this game as you will. But I look at this overall, again, you have a loss against Rob Font at bantamweight. All right, he has a loss to Petr Yan. It was a bad one, but okay. I mean, again, Matt, like, it is tough. I mean, you look at some of the wins. Henry Briones, but he did very, very well. And then I really look at the style of Silva de Andrade because he has all of those knockouts. But if you really do look at it, I mean, 66% takedown defense, and the guys that have taken him down, Tukhugov, Font, Yan, Barão, and Murphy. But if you look at it, he was able to get takedowns against Briones, Font, Vera, and Murphy. So kind of crazy to see that, especially from a guy that you think of as, man, this guy's just some smaller in terms of his stature, but bigger striker.
Without a doubt, and I would say his best win is the win over Marlon Vera. Like, that's a fight that a lot of people forget about. It was early on in Vera's career, but people forget. That was sort of the first rise of Marlon Vera. He lost that fight, and then he's had a great resurgence ever since. But for Andrade, this could be a really interesting fight because he's so good offensively in the positions where he does excel at, but defensively, he does leave a lot to be desired. Like, Andrade kind of reminds me of Donovan Mitchell when Rudy Gobert isn't in the lineup for the Utah Jazz. The offense is great, But then you look at what happens on the other side of the floor, and you're like, okay, well, if you're scoring 30, but the guy you're guarding is also scoring 30, what are we really doing right now? Like, we're even. And with Andrade, that's what I worry about. Like, could he hurt Morozov? Without a doubt. He could hurt him in the first, second, or third round. But let's say he gets a little reckless going for the finish. Let's say he does leave himself open to get taken down in a weird exchange. I think Morozov's going to be able to just ride out whatever time he needs to on top. And I don't even think he's going to have to be that active once he does get the top position. If he does just go half guard, full guard, use a lot of his weight, I really do think that physically he's going to be able to wear down Andrade as this fight goes on.
For D. Silva, still training at home in Brazil. For Sergey Morozov, he used to be out of Erken Kusha, and he's made the move over to American Top Team. And I love who his coach is, because it's not spending a lot of time with Mike Brown or Conan Silveira. It's time with Marcus D'Amata, and I am a big D'Amata guy, because if you look at it for Morozov, that's the perfect guy to train that wrestling, positionally aware type of game. And for Morozov, in that fight against Kalataha, he went 6 of 16 in his takedown attempts, so think Nick Maximov, that was the worst fight ever. And good. 8 minutes and 34 seconds of control time in that fight, all three judges scoring at 30-27 against a guy who is known for upper body strength, his own wrestling, and wonky taekwondo type striking out of Khalid Taha when he is able to fight. So when I do look at this fight, Matt, the odds, Sergey Morozov opens a favorite minus 200. He's a minus 220 right now. For D. Silva, open to plus 170. He's plus 177. If we have a look at the Tapology vote, surprised us there to you. I'll say the over-under at 67.5% for Morozov. I
think it'll be over.
You think it's going to be over? It's slightly over. 743 total votes, 72% Morozov, 87% by decision. For the 28% that have D. Silva, 70% by decision, 19% by knockout. Again, this to me is a really tricky one. It's one of those ones we talked about these fights last weekend. It's either going to be Morozov, rinse and repeat, or D. Silva's going to be able to defend a few of those takedowns and make it really interesting on the feet. And I really do like this fight.
So do I, but this is the way I think the fight's going to go. I agree with you. I think Andrade will be able to defend a few of the initial takedown attempts, but the thing about Morozov is that he's like a pit bull on a bone. He's not going to stop the second he gets that first one.
That's an insensitive one.
Is it? What?
Continue
like a dog on a bone. For Sergey Morozov, when he does get that leg, he does like to chain a lot of his wrestling attempts together, and I do think Andrade is going to have a really hard time keeping up with the wrestling attack of Morozov. Could he defend the first takedown attempt? Of course he could. Could he defend the second one? Probably. I just think that as this fight progresses, and again, this isn't a knock on Andrade's cardio either, I just think that as you are defending a lot of those takedown attempts, Morozov's going to pull you into the deeper waters.
There's a couple of things, too, with Douglas Silva de Andrade. He's the type of guy to strike and then reset. And a lot of people do that. You don't see a lot of people that fluidly strike side to side. There's one guy, and again, it's because of the recency bias from last weekend that I like to talk about, a guy that just will strike and strike and strike and strike and will reset if he gets the opportunity, and it's Julian Erosa. Douglas Silva de Andrade does not strike like that at all. It's my combinations and my set ways, and then I reset. A good opportunity for Morozov to get the takedown. And for Morozov, level of competition over with M1's a little weird because he has some decent wins. I mean, he's a mortal enemy of the Ultimate Fighter, I guess, contestant Josh Reddinghouse. One loss by finish, but then he ends up finishing or getting the win over Josh Reddinghouse for the title, and then a finish loss to Movsar Evleev in the third round of their title fight. But when it comes to this one, I think Silva de Andrade is going to catch him on the feet. I really do like Morozov. He's one of those guys that I've hyped up for a long time since his time with M1. I just think D. Silva still has it in the tank to get the win. But again, to me, it's either one or the other in this one.
Yeah, I like Morozov by decision. I really do. I do think that the pressure and just the overall wrestling game of Morozov is going to give Andrade a lot of problems. Now, could Andrade hit him with a big shot and guillotine him in the first round? Of course he could. That's the kind of fighter he is. But I do like Sergey Morozov in this one.
I'm taking the unknown of the Brazilian pocket rocket, Douglas Silva de Andrade. But again, Matt, Morozov, big time opportunity to go out there and slam home a decision win and another one for Kazakhstan. We're split on the pick, so let us know down below. Maybe it can be a little bit of a tiebreaker in the comments section who you have in this bantamweight marquee fight. We got a big time one in our main event at middleweight between Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker. You're not going to want to miss this. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. So we always say,
let's get into it.
The UFC is hell-bent on pushing their middleweight division. Last weekend, we had 4 middleweight fights, and only one of them was good, and it was from the sultry tones of Chidi and Joe Kawani and his big-time knockout win. But coming up this weekend, we have that big-time middleweight fight in our main event for the title, but buried down on the prelims, we have Robert Whittaker's teammate, because that's what most people will call him. It's Jacob Mamba Malkoun, and he's going to be welcoming the UFC debutant known as AJ Dobson. And AJ Dobson is a very interesting character because he has a lot of amateur fights, a decent pro record coming in. I mean, yeah, he has less than 10 pro fights, but he really lets his record do the talking. And if you look at it, a couple submission wins, some knockout wins, he really does have it going for him. And then the other thing that he has is the fact that he spent time training at Strong Style in Independence. You know that as the Stipe Miocic gym, and at a time it was Jessica Ai's gym. And he also trains primarily out of a more immortal mixed martial arts. You know, Matt Brown's gym. So some pretty good influences. Oh, by the way, do you know who his corner was on Dana White's Contender Series, Matt?
Not off the top of my head.
It was the Hammer, Mark Coleman. So a lot of interesting influences with AJ Dobson. And if you watch him fight, this guy, like the picture that you have next to us, tends to box very, very well. And he is a very forward pressure, heavy-handed type of guy. And again, it's worked very well for him. Now, doing the deep dive on AJ Dobson to get ready for this one, there's a lot of tape out there. I had to flex my Fight TV Plus subscription to watch some of these fights. And I got to throw it up there because, again, he gets a rear naked choke win in his last fight. He also has a rear naked choke win over Wesley Golden, who was 7-10 at the time in 2018. And if you go and watch Honor FC8, I'll throw it up on the screen. Man, that was weird. It was outdoors. So outdoor MMA, it's always a weird time. It's like, what was it? Was it Battle of Narts over with M1 Global? They used to do the fights in the mountains outside.
It was wild.
It was weird stuff. But you go back and you watch that fight that he has against Golden, drops him with the right cross. Golden crouches, and then Dobson kind of goes on his side and just grabs his neck and wraps up the rear naked. Same submission he gets against Hashem Arkaga over on Dana White's Contender Series. And in that fight, if you go back and watch that, Dobson was a slight underdog in that fight. Again, Arkaga was talking about the fact, next big Middle Eastern star in the UFC. And when you watch that fight, there's positives and negatives to draw from Dobson's performance. Positive, he gets a first-round finish. Positive, his boxing's very good, and he hits with a ton of power and knocks Arkaga down at multiple spots. Negative, he gets hit clean in that one, and he gets hit in a lot of his fights, and that's a little worrying going forward.
It definitely is, but I have great news for him. He's fighting Jacob Malkoun in his UFC debut, and that's not the hardest test out there, because you did set it up perfectly. Like, the majority of people who know Jacob Malkoun know him as, oh, that's Robert Whittaker's training partner, and I don't say this to be dismissive of him, but he does kind of fight like a guy who's told, like, give him this look. Or give Robert Whittaker that look, because he is very well-rounded himself, and we did see that in his last matchup with the wrestling side of his game, but I'm just always sort of concerned, okay, we've never really seen Jacob Malkoun put together a well-rounded game plan together. I'm sure he can. I'm just curious as to when we're going to finally see that in the UFC, and again, he's only had 2 opportunities to do so up until this point. It's just, we've had a lot of people come in, these, over 30 prospects, or, just other fighters who are in for these strange reasons that they bring up in the pre-fight promos. I don't want Jacob Malkoun to only be in the UFC because he's Robert Whittaker's training partner, but this is the fight where he's going to show us something, because I do think he's going to have a tough time on the feet, but the thing about Malkoun is that he is somewhat sound defensively. I know he got finished very fast in his UFC debut, but once he does sort of settle himself into the fight, he is a defensively sound fighter. He is good at tucking his head when he goes for his own offensive takedowns, but for me, watching Jacob Malkoun, at least up until this point throughout his UFC career, I would, it'd be really nice if he could just go out there, shoot a power double leg, get into full mount on Dobson, get a rear naked choke, and just sort of erases any of those question marks of, oh, is this guy only around because of his connection with Whittaker?
It's a really weird fight. I mean, for AJ Dobson, we kind of lean on the fact that he's got to win over a Contender Series vet, his second to last fight. He beat Kalen Hill over on B2 Fighting, and that was a neat one too, because Kalen Hill still had a little bit of that shine. He had fought Impa Kasanganay in Contender Series and went to a decision. And then Dobson drops him quick, and Hill gets back up, and he's smiling, and he's not smiling for much more, because Dobson absolutely obliterates him. And for Dobson, too, even as an amateur, a win due to a cut against John Gunther, the guy that sheared alpacas on The Ultimate Fighter, and then he ends up losing to John Gunther. But good experience to be able to draw from nonetheless. And for Malkoun, even going into that fight against a guy who can knock out 3 horses in a row and a small goat and Phil Hawes, it was really tough to tell anybody what I was going to see out of Malkoun. So here's what I can tell you right now. He was a purple belt then. He's a brown belt in jiu-jitsu now, trains at a Gracie Grange. He, in his last fight, went 8 of 24 in his takedown attempts. And Abdulrazak Alhassan, since he's kind of come back after those Sabah Hamasi fights and the long time away, Sleek Sheik, wow, he's really turning it on with Bellator. But if you look at it for Malkoun and Alhassan's kind of been hot and cold. Like, he really has. 8 of 24 is good, though. 11 minutes and 41 seconds of control time. And the last thing I have before I hand it off to you, Matt, about Jacob Malkoun, I find this funny, and hopefully somebody else does. He was listed as 6'2" coming into the UFC. And then once he's in the UFC, he's 5'9".
The Draymond Green.
Who was the fluffer there?
I couldn't imagine. Like, that, you just, you played yourself, Jacob Malkoun.
Tell me, Rod Stewart.
I think AJ Dobson has a great chance to win this fight because you sort of brought it up. I'll just sort of finish the point. Abdulrazak Alhassan needs kicks to really, really open up his whole striking game, whereas AJ Dobson can keep this fight in boxing range, and I do genuinely think that's almost going to help him defend the takedown attempts from Jacob Malkoun, because A, he's going to be close enough to where this fight's probably going to be him pressuring Malkoun, so he'll be the one to sort of force the takedown attempts out of Malkoun, and if they are just in open space in the middle of the cage, I do think Dobson's at least the more likely one to score points in the open space.
So it's definitely a good opportunity. Again, the odds for this one, Dobson open to minus 200 favorite. He's a minus 152 right now. For Jacob Malkoun, open to plus 170. He's a plus 125. So in the overall swing of things, Malkoun, one of the bigger movers and shakers on the card, about a 27% clip so far. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprise to us, they are to you. 743 total votes, 75% Dobson, 70% by knockout. For the 25% that I'm Malkoun, 74% by decision. I have AJ Dobson based on the striking. I don't think he's going to have as much success as Phil Haas does. If he does, that would surprise me. I'm eager to see how Dobson's cardio holds up because this is another thing that I have. The weight classes that AJ Dobson's fought at as a pro. 3 fights at 170, 1 at a catchweight at 175, 3 at 185. And if you look at him when he's on Dana White's Contender Series, I don't know if he's really a middleweight. I really don't when I look at him. So I'll be eager to see him in the cage against Malkoun, who's another one of those guys that, like, he's kind of got a Kelvin Gastelum. Like, Malkoun's one of those guys that's not very tall in this division. He's a little bit bigger. He's not chiseled out of stone. So I'm eager to see how Dobson makes out in this fight. But I do think if he's not able to get it really popping in the first round, Malkoun can definitely come back. We've seen him do that in the past. We've seen him do that on the regional scene too.
100%. I do like AJ Dobson, though, mainly for his striking.
Matt, both of us going with strong style / immortal martial arts own AJ Dobson to get the win. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have in this fight and the rest of them, because we got some big time bangers. Lewis Tuivasa on the co-main event, and in the main event, Whittaker Adesanya number 2. You're not going to want to miss. Let's keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Coming up this weekend, we have an absolute make or break fight at light heavyweight between the Black Jag, Carlos Ulberg, taking on Water Buffalo, Fabio Cherant. And if nicknames are any indication, yes, Water Buffalo are tough, but I would pick a Jaguar over a Water Buffalo 7.5 times out of 10, maybe?
I'm almost certain water buffaloes kill more people than, like, anything in the world.
They would, but listen, when it comes to this fight, we
I
have...
guess Figueiredo has a pet one. They can't be that scary.
Wild. Carlos Ulberg, who made an impressive yet unimpressive UFC debut, and I want to go there
Memorable?
because... Yeah, memorable. I mean, listen, if you go on Topology, his record's 3-1. UFC have it as 5-1. He had a couple of regional shows that are counted on certain sites but aren't on others. But if you do look at it, this guy has great kickboxing experience. I mean, he fought one of my favorite bugaboo fighters out there. You know him as Ryzen's Jake Hune. You know, the Honey Bear over in China in a kickboxing show, and that's a really fun one to go back and watch. But for Carlos Ulberg, I have so many different notes about the combinations that this guy throws, and actually, I have my notes laid out in a way that I've never done it before, because Matt, I'm going to open it up this way. I wrote my notes down, not just focusing in on the good things and then kind of just burying the bad things. I have it as the good and the bad. So I don't know, what do you want to hear? I want to hear from the fans in the comments section, but what do you want to hear? Do you want to hear the bad about both of these guys or the good things that they have?
How about you give me the positives from Fabio Cherant first? We'll start there.
Okay, so the positives about Fabio Cherant. Former LFA light heavyweight champ. He beat Myron Dennis, a guy who's been UFC adjacent forever. He took on a great level of competition, and in that fight, a lot of really good counters, a lot of good kicks. There's a lot of things that you can like about Fabio Cherant that way. Good lead uppercut, good left hook, great counter striker. Great counter striker. In most fights, very good counter striker. What would you like next?
Do you mind if I just kind of piggyback off that? He's a good counter striker, but Fabio Cherant does one thing that I do worry about with his counter striking. It's very powerful, but when he does like the rampage kind of duck and throw, if he misses, he leaves himself very, very, very open. And against a guy like Carlos Ulberg, that is something I worry about.
I had that point too, but I'm just focusing on the good. So what do you want to hear next? You want to hear good or bad?
You might as well give me some positives for Ulberg too. Let's even it out.
Positive for Ulberg. He was on Game of Bros. He was supposed to be the Bachelor of New Zealand, and you can tell that from the picture.
Could you imagine getting knocked out by Carlos Ulberg in a kickboxing ring and then him steal your girlfriend? Because that's probably happened before.
I don't want to think about that. What else? This is one thing that I really like. He's the type of striker that you don't often see in MMA where he can go left, right hook and knock a guy out. We talked about that in his last video, but he's one of those guys that really throws well in combination and from different angles as well. His hooks, we talk about this a lot with Fight Night Picks. There's guys that just have pop at the end of their shots or they have really long limbs, but maybe at the end of it just kind of sounds like the air coming out of a balloon, like when Sean Strickland throws some of his hooks.
Kai Kamaka III is always my example. He looks so strong, but he just doesn't get knockouts.
Carlos Ulberg's one of those guys that if you actually go back to his last fight against Kenny Nzechukwu, there's a point in the first round where Herb Dean, it's at minute 1, where Herb Dean goes, come on, you got to fight back. Ulberg almost finished that fight at minute 1, again, with 1 minute remaining, I should say. With 2 minutes remaining, the commentary was already starting to talk about Carlos Ulberg's cardio falling off a cliff. Now, a positive out of his last fight, 83 significant strikes in round 1. That doesn't happen at light heavyweight. Also had 63 in round 2. That's really good. He got caught by that right hook, Kenny Nzechukwu, and dropped. But Matt, I'm focusing on the positives here. Hey, how about his leg kicks? They're great. How about knocking out Bruno Oliveira with a wild combination? And Bruno, don't tell everybody you're going to try and box Carlos Ulberg in the pre-fight on that one, in Contender Series. But with Carlos Ulberg, there are a lot of positives with his striking.
World-class kickboxer. Here's the weird thing about this fight, though. None of what we just said matters, because both guys' strengths are the other guy's weakness. Like, this is as classic of a striker versus grappler matchup as we've ever had. Because, yes, Cherant can strike a little bit. I don't really like him striking against a lot of guys in this division, but he gets his bread buttered on the mat with his submission ability, with his wrestling. And with Carlos Ulberg, he is basically a kickboxer who just got dropped into an MMA cage, and he's like, sure, I'll figure it out on the go. Like, a lot of his takedown defense is, hey, I'm really big, and if I dig underhooks, I'm pretty strong too. But those are the type of things that really, really drain your cardio, because they're not technique-based defenses, they're just strength-based defenses.
To go off of that too, and Nzechukwu at one point tries to hook it up, as Steve Mazzagatti would say, and when it happens, it's like Ulberg hit the panic button. He throws himself away from it. He backs completely out. His hands are totally down. Like, it's still a big work in progress with the grappling. And especially for a guy that's 31, it really is a weird spot to be in this division. Because I would think if Ulberg, again, now we have a poster child for this. Adesanya's there, but Alex Pereira coming into the UFC at 3-1. Like, that's the guy that, if it's going to happen, it's got to be now. For Ulberg, it really is the same thing. And he wasn't able to get off on that right foot. Now, he almost had Nzechukwu rock from the first combination and done. So Ulberg had lots of great moments in that first round. In the second round, his hands were really low. He was starting to get hit. Even in the first round, he got hit. And that's a crazy thing. You're going from kickboxing 3-minute rounds. At the 3-minute mark of the first round, he was already starting to get tired, but he threw a lot of output. So there are things at play there. For Fabio Cherant, this is one of the bads that I had on my list. So takedown defense is not good for Fabio Cherant, but his takedown defense is defensive submissions, and they work. He has very, very good defensive submissions, and he went to try to do one of those against Alonzo Menefield, who became a wrestler, and then he got Von Flute in that fight. And then in his last fight, he came rushing forward, left his chin up, and William Knight had a step back right hook that knocked him out. So
that's my only pushback. Are you a good defensive submission specialist if you get Von Flute by Alonzo Menefield? Like, that's a submission that you hold on to. Like, that's a lack of fight IQ more than Alonzo Menefield taking it from you. Because with the Von Flute choke, you have to make that initial mistake for the other guy to be able to finish it.
And the bad thing in that fight too, Cherant took that on really, really short notice, because originally that was actually supposed to be William Knight in that fight against Menefield, and I have more to talk about William Knight on this card. But in that one, Cherant missed weight. He made weight successfully in his last fight. So Matt, I have a lot on this one, but when it really comes down to it, I think the loser gets cut.
Yeah,
I'm being incredibly frank. I don't think you give Carlos Ulberg another shot at 3-2. And for Fabio Cherant, losing 3 fights, especially your first 2 by finish, I think it's donezo. So when I look at the odds for this one, Ulberg open to -145. He's -213 right now. For Cherant, open to +125. He's +172. If we look at the Topology votes, again, a big swing for Carlos Ulberg, but I'm going to set the over-under. I'm going to say 70% Ulberg. What would you say?
I think it'll be over.
You think it's going to be over? It's over. 746 total votes, 86% with Ulberg, 82% by knockout. For the 14% that have Cherant, 38% by decision, 43% by knockout. And for Fabio Cherant, if you look at it, again, overall body of work, it's there. There's some decent fighters on that record. Obviously, the loss to Alexa Kammerer where he rocked him early on in that fight, and then eventually he gets hit by the flying knee and knocked out. He also missed weight in the fight against UG over with CES, and again, has that win over Myron Dennis to win the LFA light heavyweight belt that was on the line. When I look at it, though, again, guillotine, rear naked, anaconda choke. If Fabio Cherant wins, it's going to be by submission.
Without a doubt. I just don't think he's going to be able to get the initial takedown to get the submission. And I do think he's going to be left on an island, to bring up a basketball term, with Carlos Ulberg. I really do think that he's going to feel uncomfortable on the feet and he's going to get hit a lot as a result of it. And the thing about Ulberg is that if he gets you up against the cage and starts unloading on you, oh my goodness, you better know what you're doing defensively, because he's got that Giannis part to his game where when he goes downhill and gets momentum, there's not much you can do to stop him.
And if you want, again, the Carlos Ulberg one that he rocked at a minute against Kenny Nshukwu, he went right hand to the body, left hook up top, right shovel hook, and then ended it by a left head kick that rocked him. So Carlos Ulberg is one of the better strikers you're going to find at 205. It's just that he has a lot of blemishes. And for Fabio Cherant, great counter striker. That's something that gets you caught against a guy like Carlos Ulberg. If you're waiting for it, you're going to get it and you can get finished. I like Fabio Cherant in this fight, though. And the reason why is because he's not green in the game of MMA. He has those submission skills. It's going to take the wrestling to get him down. I think a game plan out of Lozon's MMA is going to get him ready for a fight like this. But again, would I bet on it? No, because Fabio Cherant has the liability of getting knocked out. Carlos Ulberg's one of the best pure strikers in this division. So if Ulberg gets a win by knockout, I mean, I get it wrong on my record, but I wouldn't be surprised. But there's definitely avenues for both of these guys to get the win.
Yeah, without a doubt. I still like the pure striker, though, in Ulberg.
You've got Super Dave Osborne going with Carlos Ulberg in this fight. I've got Fabio Cherant. You let us know down below. Is it Black Jag or is it going to be the Water Buffalo? And coming up later on at middleweight for the belt, we have Adesanya taking on Whittaker. Number 2. Let's keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Coming up this weekend at lightweight, we honestly have one of the easier fights to break down and preview, but one of the tougher fights to actually give you a prediction on. We have Alexander Hernandez. The nickname is The Great. And in his last 5 fights, it's been the mixed bag. I mean, 3-2 with the one win over Francisco Trinaldo that kind of bookends it. That was Texas judging at its best. And for Renato Moicano, 2-3, and you look at the losses that he has: 1 to Jose Aldo by knockout, 1 to the Korean Zombie by knockout, a win over Damir Hadzovic, a loss to Fizzy by knockout, and a win over Jai Herbert that kind of ages well, I guess. But when I do look at this fight, Moicano's one of those guys that he can strike. He can strike. He's a good striker, but he tends to strike for too long. And then once he strikes for too long, he gets knocked out. And for Alexander Hernandez, he can wrestle. He can wrestle, but he can get caught with his wrestling, and he can also get caught in some of the striking, too. Knockout loss to Drew Dober. He has a loss by decision to Thiago Moises. And the wins that he has, again, I mentioned Trinaldo earlier, a win over Chris Gritzmacher, and a win over Mike Breeden, who came in on short notice for Leonardo Santos. And that one is just a tough fight to really try and put too much stock into.
They should call this fight Alexander Hernandez and the lessons he could have learned from Cowboy, because whatever he learned in that fight is 100% applicable to this one. You have a long-range striker who uses middle attacks, sort of straight punches and knees up the middle, who has good jiu-jitsu and relies a lot on leg kicks. It sounds a lot like Cowboy Cerrone. And the weird thing for Moicano is that I don't think he's a bad striker by any means. Go back and watch the Calvin Kattar fight. He beat the brakes off Calvin Kattar, and that fight was only on the feet. But he needs the leg kick and the body kick to really set everything else up on the feet. And I think it's going to be very similar in this matchup, too, with Alexander Hernandez. Because Hernandez is weird. He's definitely got better, don't get me wrong. But has he gotten better at the things that you would really like to see him get better at for him to make the most out of his MMA skill set? Because with Hernandez, he was going to move down to 145, and then he lost to Drew Dober, and then, I'll stick around, fight Grutzmacher. Well, that was a good win. We'll see how I do against Moises. There's always an oh, by the way, it seems like, with Alexander Hernandez, and I never really know where his ceiling is at this stage. Like, you can ask some people what their opinion of Hernandez is, and they're like, hey, he's still a bright young talent, and he could get into the top 15 at some point. And other people think, like, oh, that punk, like, he's never going to turn into anything. So this should be a really fun fight, and I think you set it up perfectly. Like, it's an easy fight to break down, but a very hard one to predict.
So it's a really weird one. I mean, you look at it for Alexander Hernandez, he's never been submitted. And if you look at it for Moicano, he's a decent striker. He's never knocked anybody out, and he has plenty of submission wins. And if you look at all of his losses, they're all by finish, and one of them by submission, and the other one's by knockout. So it really has been weird for Renato Moicano. This is a guy that's main evented, albeit, 2.5 years ago against the Korean Zombie, a poster that is very cheap, autographed on the UFC's website. That's not a promo, but it's just the truth. And Moicano was one of those guys coming out of Jungle Fight that had a lot of hype behind him. And I mean, realistically, if he was able to get the win at UFC 214 over Brian Ortega, who knows where we could be? Who really does know? I mean, wins over Tom Ninamaki, who really didn't have it all together with the UFC. A split win over Zubair Takuyava. Split win over PFL's own Jeremy Stevens. And so on and so forth. I mean, it just has been a weird run for Renato Moicano. And now when I look at it, I mean, for Moicano at lightweight at 32, honest to goodness, to try and project like a ceiling on either one of these guys. On Hernandez's best day, he knocks out one of the top 5 lightweights in the world in Beneil Dariush. But on his worst day, like, you're losing to fringe 15 guys. And for Moicano, on your best day, you're almost beating title contenders at 145. And on your worst day, you're getting knocked out by Fiziev, who's a very good striker. You're getting knocked out by the Korean Zombie. You're getting knocked out by Jose Aldo. It's just, even though the 5-on-in for Renato Moicano is so spread out, that Aldo fight was almost 3 years ago. It's just, like, knockout losses like that kind of change the way that people fight. Usually, they do anyway.
I like Moicano's game a lot more than I like Alexander Hernandez's, though. Like, if we take the fighter out of it and we just look at both guys' skill sets, Moicano, everything he does fits together. He attacks the legs to the body, tires you out, tries to get you to the mat, but can also volume strike. Like, all those things work together, and there is direct synergy in his game. Here's the one knock I have against Alexander Hernandez that I feel like people don't talk about this enough. He moves too much on the feet. Like, way too much. Like, he's never in a set stance where, okay, now I'm moving forward with my combinations, now I'm moving backwards. He's always doing this very erratic movement on the outside, and I don't think it helps him at all in his fights.
Sometimes he does the thing, yeah, you're right. It's not so much like, you see it, TJ Dillashaw is my biggest example, but there's a lot of fighters that do it, and you know the example I'm going to go with. I'm throwing my hand out here. I'm throwing my hand out here. I'm throwing hip feints, and I'm really throwing people off with my striking. Hernandez does this weird thing where he plants his feet, puts his head out, and then, like, puts his hands out, but, like,
it's like he's playing perimeter defense in a basketball game. Like, he almost widens his stance and goes from left to right. And it does make him more elusive, don't get me wrong, but here's the problem.
It hasn't really caught him yet either.
But it had, like, Cowboy knocked him out because of it, because he just kept on meeting him with a knee because he was moving his head a lot. Like, with Hernandez, the bare bones of his game are very positive, but I know we're going to talk about Casey O'Neill, Roxanne Modafferi later. Roxanne's kind of similar. Like, the bare bones of her game is really good, but at this stage of her career, there's some holes in it, right? With Hernandez, I like his wrestling. I like his power punching. I hate how hittable he is on the feet, though, and I don't like his in-fight adjustments at all, because I've yet to see him make, like, real key fight-changing adjustments in a fight. He's been around for a long enough time.
And if you look at it, I mean, striking-wise, Moicano strikes at a much higher rate. Hernandez has a negative strike differential if we're going that way. Again, it's not like Hernandez getting knocked out in similar fashion to Moicano, but when Moicano's fighting guys like Jose Aldo and the Korean Zombie, it is a little bit different. So when we look at the odds for this one, Hernandez open at plus 155, plus 145 right now. For Moicano, open a minus 180, minus 177 is the average, minus 175, something around there. Tapology vote, surprised that's there to you. So the odds have Moicano to get the win. I'm going to say over under 72.5% Moicano. What would you say?
I think they'll be above.
Think they're going to be above? They're actually below. 781 total votes, 56% Moicano, 36% by decision, 54% by submission. For the 44% that have Hernandez, 31% decision, 59% by knockout. So, Hernandez knocks out Moicano. Moicano submits Hernandez. I would be surprised if Hernandez put his wrestling shoes on for this fight. So if it's just strictly a stand-up affair, Hernandez has a giant overhand right that is very tough to get out of the way because he has that speed and that power. But when I look at this fight, again, we talked about it. I mean, the synergy of Moicano's game, I really like how he's able to bring it together. And especially if you look at it, I mean, for Moicano, his last fight's against Jai Herbert, a guy that really was able to get it done over with Cage Warriors in the UFC.
It's been a tough run.
It's been a bit of a mixed bag. If you look at Moicano in his last fight, boy, was he able to string everything together in that one. 5 of 7 in his takedown attempts, 7 minutes and 35 seconds of control time against a good boxer. But that was in 2 rounds, like under your total of 10 minutes. That is incredible. So again, Hernandez is going to be way more difficult to take down than a guy like Herbert because Hernandez has the wrestling, Herbert is a boxer. But in this fight, I do like Moicano for everything that he brings into it.
I really do think we're going to see a similar fight to the Moicano-Cater fight. I think he's going to go to the legs a lot, sort of neutralize the forward movement and the overall aggression of Alexander Hernandez, and just kind of piece him up on the feet with his volume. I think it'll be a really good fight, but I do like Moicano.
Bob Einstein and I, both of us going with Renato Moicano to get the win. Can't wait for this fight. If you have Texas's own Alexander Hernandez out of Factory X Muay Thai, you let us know down below in the comments, as well as if you have American top teams. Renato Moicano, big time fights coming up on this card. Up at the top, Derrick Lewis taking on Tuivasa. In the main event, Robert Whittaker taking on the man himself, Israel Adesanya. The champ is here. Can't wait for it. Let's keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say,
Let's get into it.
Fight of the night contender coming up this weekend in my favorite or maybe second favorite division in all of MMA at bantamweight. We have Leo Mana Boy Martinez taking on the Heat, Ronnie Lawrence. And listen, he's better than the movie. I didn't enjoy it. But
What?
I didn't like the movie The Heat. But I can tell you...
The bank robbery one?
The one with Melissa McCarthy?
You're talking about the wrong Heat. One of the greatest heist movies ever is called Heat.
We're talking about different movies, but when we're focused on this fight, this is an absolute barn burner because for Ronnie Lawrence, this is one of those guys that has very unorthodox striking. He can throw very well in combination, but the way that he gets his bread buttered is with his takedowns, and he is relentless at getting them. And if you liked a guy like Jailton Almeida last weekend, Ronnie Lawrence is one of those guys. And I have it written down here. I mean, on Dana White's Contender Series, he was a big underdog against Jose Johnson, who would end up losing that fight, and then winning a fight, and then fighting Mana Martinez, and then getting knocked out really, really quick. But in the fight against Johnson, it was, listen, Ronnie Lawrence, he can work his wrestling, but Johnson is way bigger, and he's going to be able to knock him out, and he's going to be great. Ronnie Lawrence went 12 of 17 on his takedown attempts, and it was absolutely amazing. And Mana Martinez, again, 2 fights later, knocked him out in 32 seconds. So how good was Jose Johnson, really? But Ronnie Lawrence follows that up with his UFC debut. And against Vince Cachero, who's a decent wrestler, very well-rounded, 8 of 9 on takedown attempts for a third round TKO win. Lawrence has had a weird run since then, because that last fight, you might think of it as, oh man, like, Ronnie Lawrence, he's a great prospect, and he is. But that fight was in February of last year. He was booked to fight in July. A fight fell out. Then he got another fight against Trevin Jones. Then, if you go in Topology, it says there was a botched weight cut. So I had to really look into it, because if you just say botched weight cut, that can mean anything. Ronnie Lawrence, so his management said on the MMA Hour, he was able to make weight successfully backstage. He got up, and then he cramped right up. And it just didn't work out for him. Went to the hospital, went through some tests. He was all right. But even then, like he was supposed to fight in July, and now we're here in February of 2022. He gets a good opportunity taking on Mana Martinez, who was knocking guys dead until he made it into the UFC. Then he has a bunch of opponent changes, just like you had Ronnie Lawrence. Trevin Jones was actually one of those opponents. He ends up taking on 41-year-old Guido Canetti, the Southpaw pride of Argentina. And in that fight, Mana Martinez loses the first round in a way where I went, man, where was the hype that I saw in this guy? Like, I get it. I mean, he lost to, Draco Rodriguez on Dana White's Contender Series, but there's got to still be some momentum here. And Martinez missed weight for that fight, too. You got to note that. He weighed 140.5. He had just lost his head coach from Metro Fight Club, Saul Solis, because he's in the camp with Adrian Yanez. And it was really heavy on his heart. He ends up winning by split decision because Adelaide Bird saw the second round for Guido Canetti, which was kind of insane. But when it really came down to it, he was incredibly emotional after that fight, and it must have been really, really tricky on him. So coming into this fight, Mana Martinez, really good boxing backwards and forwards, which is interesting to see. And once he gets to the mat, he can mix it up. Ronnie Lawrence is one of those guys, man. Like, his takedowns are crazy. So I think this is going to be a great fight.
Do you remember that song from every NHL game where it's like, tick, 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 boom?
They don't say tick that many times.
Either way, Mana Martinez fights like that song. You're just sort of waiting for something to happen until it does. And when he does decide to hit boom, oh my goodness, the results are absurd. But this will be a really interesting fight. And there are a number of fights like this on this card where it's okay, what's going to win? The consistent game of Ronnie Lawrence, his takedown heavy game plan, his just overall grappling, or can Mana Martinez go out there and shock the world and get one of those crazy, like, 10,000 retweet Twitter highlights? Both of those things are very possible in this fight. It'd be really interesting, though, to see what happens if Ronnie Lawrence can get a takedown early in this fight and really kind of establish his presence as the superior grappler. Because if you can make Mana Martinez sort of question his own striking ability, you're going to make him at least less likely to throw his own strikes. And I think Ronnie Lawrence can have a great ton of success just pressuring Mana Martinez, but being intelligent about it. Because if you're constantly just walking forward on a guy like Martinez and not shifting up the way that you do it, that's when he will be able to set up one of those big shots that puts you out. But if Lawrence can almost do the Marvin Vettori game plan where it's okay, I'm going to wrestle to hide my head and then try to finish all my takedown attempts, I really do think Lawrence can maybe not get himself into that like top tier prospect category, but I do think a lot more people will be talking about it because, and I would like to get your opinion on this. When we do like the 5-on-ins and stuff, I know it's very like applicable to Tapology because they show it, but when you're on a 5-fight win streak, people start taking you a lot more serious than when you're on a 4-fight or a 3-fight. Like once you do get, okay, he is on a 5-fight win streak in the UFC, people start taking you a lot more serious after that.
Well, that's it. For Ronnie Lawrence's last loss was Steve Garcia over with Bellator. He took a long time off between the Garcia fight and his next fight against Michael Ricketts. And if you look at it for Martinez, his last loss was by submission to Draco Rodriguez on Dana White's Contender Series a year and 4 months ago. Some big wins over Casey Jones and Jose Johnson on Dana White's looking for a fight. I don't believe the Nelk Boys were there, and that's the only Nelk Boys reference for this entire show.
I still don't even really know who they are.
They're the Full Send guys. I'm pretty sure they're Canadian like us. But when it comes to that, maybe they'll have us on someday. You never know. But when it comes to this fight and the odds for this fight, Mana Martinez open to plus 230, still roughly there. For Ronnie Lawrence, about a minus 280 favorite. And if we have a look over on Tapology for the total votes, I'm not going to ask because I'm excited just to see. Surprised us, it is to you. Oh man, 723 total votes, 82% Lawrence, 80% by decision. For the 18% that are Martinez, 66% by decision, 23% by knockout. Hey, Tapology voters, I'm Mana Martinez. He's only ever won one fight by decision. It was against Guido Canetti, and it was a weird one. I don't think he's going to win by decision. I think if it's going to be Ronnie Lawrence on the way in. Good spinning back kick from Mana Martinez. That was one of my big ones. And a really good breadth of strikes. He can throw from a lot of different angles, and he can really string together combinations. And he's got a lot of power for a guy in this division as long as he makes the bantamweight limit. So I like Ronnie Lawrence. I think he is one of those prospects at 135 right now. I think he's really stringing it together. I have him winning this fight, and I can't wait to see, regardless of who wins, who they match these guys with up next, because like the Nathaniel Woods, the Casey Kennys, like where are we? I think we're right there.
Bantamweight's so good that their borderline top 15 guys could have their own top 15. That's how good this weight division is right now. No, I couldn't agree more. I just like the steadier game out of Ronnie Lawrence in this. And listen, does that mean Mana Martinez could go out there, throw a head kick in the first 30 seconds and win? Of course he could. He has that kind of power. But when you break down fights, you normally want to pick the guy who is the most skilled. And I think Ronnie Lawrence is the most skilled.
Me and the much smaller, whiter Chidi and Joe Kawani are going with Ronnie Lawrence to get the win in this fight. Let us know down below in the comment sections who you have, because this should be an absolute banger. We get some big time fights up at the top of this card. Lewis taking on Tai Tuivasa. Maybe there's a title shot on the line there. And in the main event, it is for the title. You've got Adesanya defending against Whittaker. It's the second time they shall fight. Let's keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Very interesting fight coming up this weekend at light heavyweight. We have the Nightmare William Knight taking on Maxim Grishin. Originally, this was supposed to be Ed Herman, Max Grishin in a battle of older man toughness. And if I know anything about Ed Herman, sometimes you lose a finger in an artesian well, and then it gets reattached and you continue to fight and you win your fight. So crazy stuff from Ed Herman. Unfortunately, we couldn't get him this weekend, but in steps William Knight. He's won his last 2 fights. That's a lot of fun. Max Grishin, 1-2 in the UFC, but Grishin has a very extensive record outside of the promotion. He was able to take the O from former UFC light heavyweight and middleweight Jordan Johnson, and he also has a draw against Johnson in a 2-round fight with the PFL because playoffs are fun. But for Grishin, comes into the UFC really late in his career, on short notice, at heavyweight, loses to Marcin Tybura. Well, that's fine, right? So then he comes out the next time, beats Gadjimrat and Tigilov. And listen, I gotta be completely honest with you. I think every prospect that has hype should have to fight Gadjimrat and Tigilov. I was thinking this last night, because we're on Sunday after the fight night card. Jailton Almeida, Gadjimrat and Tigilov. That's the fight that then gets him into the top 15, and then he starts fighting.
I think Tigilov's fallen off a lot.
I know, but I still think that would have been the fight. Either way, Grishin beats Tigilov. That's a good win. The weird thing about this fight is both of these guys have claims that they either won or lost their last fight. For Grishin, he did not win the fight on the scale. He weighed 210.5. That is incredibly unprofessional when you're a light heavyweight. And he was getting ready for the fight in the States. Like, he was at Extreme Couture before that one. So, weird to see a guy missing weight, especially, a guy that's been a professional and hasn't really been an issue in the past. But for Grishin, knocks down Dustin Jacoby twice in the first round, outstrikes him in total throughout the entire fight, but it was the pressure of Jacoby in the second, third rounds that was able to get him that win, and I just wanted to talk about the totals in that one.
Totals don't mean anything.
Judges all had it 29-28 for Jacoby, 9 on MMA decisions, the media members had it for Jacoby, 6 had it for Max Grishin. For William Knight, I talk about this 2-fight win streak that he is on. He's got a win over Fabio Cherant, finished him. He has a win over Alonzo Menafield his last time out. All 3 judges scored that contest 29-28. All 13 media members on MMA Decision scored it 29-28 for Alonzo Menafield the other way. It's just weird to see it when the judges all have it for one guy, and the public and Twitter in that case all had it for Menafield. So for Knight, it was a weird one because it was the clinch control of Menafield as the fight went on. It was the power shots when he was able to do those little flurries and blitzes that won it for William Knight. Kind of similar to the fight that we had last weekend, Puna Soriano, Nick Maximo, but the scorecards were a little bit reversed there.
I have a bit of a hot take, and I'm glad you brought up last weekend's co-main event. I kind of think this fight's going to be, at least entertainment-wise, kind of similar to that fight. And hear me out. This is a very, very strange fight because for William Knight to have any level of success, he's going to get through a wall of strikes. And it's not really like there's an actual wall there, but he's going to have to fight himself into range at a certain point. And here's the thing about Grishin. He is putting on hole 17, I believe, in his MMA career. I really do.
You're telling me 37-year-old with 40 fights?
But at this weight division, every other fighter is 40 or 37 years old with 40 fights. I just don't think Grishin is the fighter he was outside the UFC coming over. To me, it's very similar to when Douglas Lima was finally able to get the belt from Rory McDonald and Bellator. His prime, if you will, was very short-lived because it took him a long time to get all the skills required to sort of catch up to him physically. And then once he got a little bit older and his athleticism started to fade, it's just those two things didn't really match up all that well for him. With Grishin, I find him in kind of the same boat. Technically, yes, he has a very, very good skill set, but he does tire in fights sometimes. He doesn't always have the best distance management. You can get on the inside of him. But like you said, in the Jacoby fight, I famously said Dustin Jacoby is the 16th best light heavyweight in the world. I think anytime you beat him, you can probably get in the top 15. And when you lose to him, you don't have that much further to go. And I know we're going to disagree on this based on a text you sent me earlier. I think this is the worst weight class in the UFC by a long slide. Because you have guys like William Knight, Max Grishin, who are borderline ranked fighters in it. When we talk about the bantamweight division before, we said what? There's basically a ranking outside of the ranking for their top 30. It's so deep. At light heavyweight, you really only need 1 or 2 wins to really get yourself up into that rankings conversation. And for Grishin, this is how I think the fight's going to go for him. I think he'll have success early on when he can keep William Knight outside of his range. But I worry about how does Grishin get his range back once he does lose it, because he's not the most mobile guy on his back foot. And I do worry about him sort of at least getting caught up against the cage and squared in at some point.
The weirdest thing about Grishin, he is really good from long range. He has great leg kicks. He has some of the best leg kicks you're going to see in this division. Like, they are incredible. And for a guy like William Knight does this. Stands with his head way back, his hands pretty low, heavy on his lead leg.
Lunges.
You don't see a lot of that working for a lot of fighters. But here's the thing. Heavyweight's going to have a season of The Ultimate Fighter where they just tried to bury under the rug. They have a guy that hasn't won a fight since 2017. He's 43, going by a different name, living in a different country. That's how bad heavyweight is. That season of The Ultimate Fighter, I'm not looking forward to it as it stands right now. I got to let that cat out of the bag.
When was the last time you were looking forward to an Ultimate Fighter? Because it's been a while for me.
After the fact, I got excited about the last season. But that was only after the fact. And Ricky Tercios, where you at, bud? I'd love to see that guy fight. But when it comes to that season, The Ultimate Fighter, it's not good for heavyweight. Heavyweight's in a weird spot where Aspinall's still a hot prospect. Chris Daukaus fell after the fight against Derrick Lewis. I'm sure he'll be back. You do have some movers and shakers at heavyweight, but by and large, it's not a strong division. Light heavyweight. I'm getting excited about Tyson Pedro, who hasn't fought in like 3 years. But when Paul Craig's a ranked fighter, light heavyweight's in a bad spot. Middleweight is also not in the greatest spot. So when it comes to this fight, William Knight has a big opportunity to get a win here. He struggled when he took on a guy that I thought he was going to blow the doors off in Da Un Jung with the wrestling, which is somewhere where William Knight, with the judo throws and the body movement that he has, I would have thought he was going to be able to win that fight and not get out-wrestled by Da Un Jung, but it happened.
That fight to you, though, is like Jonathan Pierce, Joe Lozon to me. Like, it does stand out in your mind quite a bit anytime we talk about William Knight. But that's the thing. He is good at judo. He's not great at defending traditional takedowns. That's why I think it's going to really help him in this matchup, because he's so much shorter than Maxim Grishin, to where if they ever do get into a clinch situation, Grishin's not going to be able to shoot on the hips of William Knight. And that's why I actually think Knight's going to be the one who can dictate whether or not this fight is spent on the feet or on the mat.
We look at the odds for this fight, and for Max Grishin, open a minus 200 favorite. He's minus 176 right now. Again, this one on relatively short notice where Ed Herman fell out. For William Knight, open to plus 170, he's plus 144. You see him still doing the strength and conditioning on Instagram and training the boxing over at Thornton Martial Arts. We look at the votes on Tapology, 542 of them, 75% Knight, 58% by knockout for the 25% that have Grishin, 74% by decision. It's always fun to see when the odds disagree with the fans, and then our commenters say, yeah, but you can't look at the fans on Tapology. It's just a fun thing to do. We're fun guys talking about MMA on the internet.
Kawhi Leonard.
Yeah,
we're fun guys.
But when I focus on this one and not the guy that's out for the rest of the season, I do like William Knight. Again, Grishin has slapping leg kicks like Geddy Lee on the base. He has really good long-range weapons, and when he backs guys up against the cage, typically he has a lot of success. Good uppercuts, too, when he's in that clinch situation. I like William Knight with his power. I like William Knight when Max Grishin tries to close that distance. And I like him in those positions up against the cage to reverse position or earn takedowns of his own.
I know I normally make basketball references, but you can help me out with this one. Who was the first baseman for the Boston Red Sox who couldn't get that ground ball when the Mets won the title?
Bill Buckner.
Bill Buckner moves like Max Grishin. Like, Grishin doesn't move well on his feet.
He's got
whatsoever.
a good L step, that's it.
But he doesn't move forward or backwards all that well. Like, there is a labored pace to the way that he does move forwards and backwards. And poor Bill Buckner lost his team the World Series because his knees were bad. It's not like Grishin has knee issues to that level, but Grishin just doesn't move all that well on his feet for being such a big guy at this weight division. I agree with you. I like William Knight, but I will put some stock into how these guys face off come weigh-in day, because let's say Grishin looks huge compared to William Knight to the point where it looks like a heavyweight is fighting a middleweight, then maybe I will switch my pick, but I do like William Knight.
Fingers crossed Max Grishin makes the weight. Won't allow any Buckner slander on this channel. The guy had a Hall of Fame career and made one big mistake that everybody thinks about. Both of us going with the nightmare, William Knight, to get the win. You let us know down below in the comment section who you have. Will it be Grishin? Will it be Knight? I don't know. Do you? It's going to be a good fight regardless. And up at the top at 185, you have a title fight for the ages. The rematch between Whittaker and Adesanya. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Big time fight coming up this weekend in one of the most dynamic divisions in all of MMA, which is crazy to say in 2022 because 4 years ago you wouldn't believe me. We have Alex Perez coming off of a title defeat a very long time ago, taking on Danger. High voltage. It is Matt Schnell and Matt Allen. We talked about this fight back in December. It was originally booked. It was rebooked, and now we have it coming up in February. So we're going to throw it on back to that original video. We'll update you with the odds and our final predictions. So let's throw it on back to the video from December. We have Alex Perez coming off of his UFC 250 title shot back over a year ago against Deiveson Figueiredo, and he's taking on a bit of a scuffling Matt Schnell, who's 1-2 in his last 3 fights, his 1 win by split decision. So let me set it up here, and hopefully I do a pretty good job with the setup. You might think you peeped the scene. You haven't. The real one's far too mean. Matt, that's one of your favorite songs. Maybe it's one of somebody else's favorite songs out there. And I hope that that's a good setup, because I think Nicki Minaj did a pretty good job on that Kanye West track. This is how I'm going to set this one up. Alex Perez is the best fighter that we've seen off of Dana White's Contender Series. If you want to argue with me, fine. You might not even realize he came off Contender Series, because it has been a while, as Stained once said, if you want more music references. If you look at it for Perez, his UFC losses, he's been 6-2 so far. The losses to Joe B and Figueiredo. He went on a wild win streak to get that title shot over Mark De La Rosa, Jordan Espinoza, and Jussier Formiga, my favorite Brazilian at 125. And listen, if you look at those last 2 wins that he had, Espinoza and Formiga, both bonus worthy, and he picked up those 50 G's, baby, and he gets a title shot, and he looked bad. He looked very bad in that fight.
No, he didn't. He hurt Figueiredo early. His striking was looking good. Then he got submitted by a guillotine.
He got finished in the first round. I have this to say. You get finished in the first round. It's definitely not a good showing. It left a bad taste in my mouth when you lose that quick. However, for Matt Schnell, it's been a weird run. I mean, I expect so much out of Max Schnell, because when I look at him, maybe I pronounce his name Max Schnell. Maybe I meant to say Matt Schnell. I'm so excited about the fight. But when I look at the guy whose nickname is Danger, he's kill or be killed. He's 5-4 in the UFC. 5 of 9 of those fights ending by finish. Some by his own doing, some not. He struggles against certain guys. Like, he's just a wonky fighter. I'd really like to get your take on Matt Schnell.
But this has to be said. Have you ever seen a boring Matt Schnell fight?
No.
I certainly haven't. Like, that's the really fun thing. He's just so well-rounded, I guess. That's the best way to bring up Matt Schnell. He's like Brad Pitt in the movie Troy. The problem is, his Achilles is his durability. Because Schnell, is he a good grappler? Yeah, he's a really good grappler. He can get submissions, he can get out of submissions, he can scramble, defend takedowns, and get his own takedowns. So I would say he's a pretty good grappler. Can he strike? Well, yeah, he's got a really nice high guard. He has good volume. I wouldn't say it's great, and he has good power. I wouldn't say it's great. He's sort of in that, I hate saying it's the Paul Felder category, but I feel like people do understand what I say when I say this, where he's not like a 10 out of 10. He can't really knock you out with one punch, but he doesn't have to hit you with like 100 shots like Max Holloway. He's kind of in that in-between where I strike in combination and I'm susceptible to being hit. And that's the big problem with Schnell. For him to have his most success, he has to stand in that pocket and throw some big bombs. Now, to his credit, he does have pretty good power for the division, so if he lands, he's going to hurt his opponent. The problem is that I feel like his biggest weakness, honestly, is just he stands in the pocket for 1 second too long, and it's just bitten him so many times at this stage of his career. Like in the Pantoja fight, he hurts Pantoja with a big shot, gets a little overexcited, and the second he opens himself, even an inch, Pantoja hits him with a big shot, puts him down. It's just sort of been that story throughout his career. It's Schnell's looking really good, and I hate to frame it this way, but this is almost the case where it's like, okay, he's looking really good, and then he finds a way to lose, or at least the opportunity opens itself up, and even his win over Tyson Nam, it was starting to go down a bit of a bad road by the end of that fight. He started out really strong, but midway through the second, he's being tagged by some clean shots on the outside, and midway through the third, the same thing has to be said. Now, getting hit clean by Tyson Nam a couple of times isn't the end of the world. Like, Nam's a really, really good striker.
Ask Zaruk Adeshev.
Exactly. He's a really good striker, and honestly, if anything, that shows that Schnell isn't the least durable fighter in this division, because he was able to eat some big shots against Nam, so that proves a few things to me. I just don't know what his answer is going to be for the leg kicks and just the overall hooks and power of Alex Perez, because Perez is a really unique fighter where he is very dedicated to the leg kick, similar to like Chris Gutierrez, where he will just spam it. And I mean spam it, like UFC 4 style. Keep on hitting circle like there's no tomorrow. But this is going to be sacrilegious, but I would say his leg kicks are kind of similar to Jose Aldo. A little bit. Like, he goes to the calf, he goes to the thigh, he can mix it up, and for Perez, he only needs 2 or 3 of them to really make a big difference in the fight. This is why I say he didn't look that bad against Figueiredo. Yes, he got finished in the first round, but in the first 3 minutes of that fight, he was lighting Figueiredo up on the feet. He was doing something that I did not expect from Perez, so I feel like I do have to at least give him credit for the few short moments he had success against Figueiredo on the feet.
So when I look at this fight again, for Matt Schnell, 5-4 in the UFC, 3 of those 4 losses by knockout. He debuted against Rob Font at Tough Tournament of Champions, the finale, so it's been a little while. But yeah, I mean, when I look at it, for Perez, 5 of his 6 wins in the UFC octagon by finish. This is a guy, again, the leg kicks are there. The wrestling's there. All right, so in updating the odds for this fight, Alex Perez is a big favorite. Open to -310, he's a -400 right now. For Matt Schnell, open to +260, roughly a +300. And if we have a look at the Tapology votes in this one, Matt, I'm going to set the over-under at 85% Alex Perez. What are you saying?
I'll say slightly under, but it'll be a big favorite.
Holy smokes. 759 total votes, 93% Perez. 45% by decision, 44% by knockout. For the 7% that have Schnell, they're kind of mixed bag, really, submission, knockout, or decision. So, Matt, the odds makers overwhelmingly have Alex Perez. The fans, the large majority have Alex Perez. I'm going to pick Alex Perez, you're going to pick Alex Perez, but how does Matt Schnell win this fight?
It's really hard for him, and I'm glad that you bring up that question, because for Matt Schnell, very well-rounded, good boxer, good submission. I would say great submission ability, honestly, but I do worry about his durability. Like, even in the fights where he wins, anytime he eats a clean shot, you're like, oh, was that a misstep? How's he gonna look? I really do think Alex Perez is in that Askar Askarov, Alejandro Pantoja, Brandon Moreno, Devison Figueiredo category, to where when we talk about the top fighters in this division, you have to mention Alex Perez. And I know it's been a while outside the UFC. He does kind of need this performance to sort of prove, hey, I'm back. But I do think that if he can start being a little bit more consistent, he'll reinsert himself right back into the top of this division. He's got such great leg kicks, really nice boxing, good submission skills. I just really like Alex Perez's game, if I'm being honest.
I mean, it's going to be really awkward if you ever do meet Alessandro Pantoja. I'm going to say that you called him Alejandro, and I do not want to see what happens in that one.
He'd be a nice guy.
Matt Schnell's last time out took on Rogerio Bontorin. It was a fight that was overturned to a no contest, but in that fight, he was unable to get it done against the man himself, Rogerio Bontorin, who failed a drug test. He's failed drug tests. He's missed weight. He could be one of the best flyweights out there. Maybe we'll never know. But when it comes to this fight, I do like Perez. I really like his wrestling, his top pressure, his boxing, his leg kicks, the intangibles, everything's there. It's just that he's been out for a long time since that title fight. And listen, Dominic Cruz might not like ring rust, but some people it affects differently than others. So we'll see what happens. Not an anchor to a parlay for me, but both of us going with Alex Perez to get the win. And boy, do we ever have some big fights coming up on this one.
Oddly enough, like, this fight has more ramifications for its division than pretty much any other fight on this card. Like, if Perez looks really good, he could maybe fight Figueiredo, or maybe he fights Moreno next. Like, there's so many great fighters in this division, and it is kind of wide open right now, but I mean that in the best way possible. So I think this could be a really fun fight.
There's some more big-time fights. Up at the top of this card, Derek Brunson taking on Jared Cannonier, and in the main event, in the same division for the title, Adesanya taking on Robert Whittaker. You're not going to want to miss this. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. And a happy retirement it will be to the happy warrior, Roxanne Modafferi. She is going to make the walk for a 45th time as a professional. And listen, first time Roxanne Modafferi fought was in 2003. Casey O'Neill was 6 at that time. Kind of wild. She's taking on the undefeated prospect known as King Casey O'Neill, the Scozzy, representing Scotland and Australia. Her father, Cam, one of the men in charge of Eternal MMA, and a lot of great prospects coming out of Eternal lately. And when it comes to this fight, I mean, for Casey O'Neill, I gotta lay my cards on the table, Matt. I had a pretty good read of Roxanne Modafferi coming into the UFC, you know?
Well, she came in with 45 fights. So.
That's it. No, she really did have an extensive record. She was on The Ultimate Fighter, not once, but twice. She was on it for bantamweight and then for flyweight, and then made it all the way to the title fight at the end and lost to Nico Montano. How crazy is that? I mean, Sajara Eubanks. Who? What? But for Roxanne Modafferi, she is that crafty veteran. We talk about it in all sorts of different divisions. It seems like every weekend there's one of them, like Ed Herman, Matt Brown. There's just fighters like that they know how to win. It's like watching Chavo Guerrero out there in WWE.
Oh, Chavo.
Yeah, Chavo always knew a way. Or Eddie. I lie, I cheat,
Eddie was awesome.
Steal. They knew how to win. Roxanne Modafferi's like that too. She knows exactly how to win. She can get it done with her wonky, weird stand-up. She can get it done on the ground. She's very, very well-rounded. Doesn't accept damage very well, and can get out-wrestled and held in position on the ground. But by and large, Roxanne Modafferi, you know what you're going to get time and again. And sometimes she can surprise you, and in spots like this, beat Maycee Barber as a giant underdog. Now, taking on Casey O'Neill, and the reason I set it up that way, Matt, is because for Casey O'Neill, I had very low expectations coming into the UFC. I watched all the tape.
I can't say this often, but this was one of the few prospects that I actually think I was right. Like, normally you've got your eye on the prospects compared to me, like you called Piotr Jan, but Casey O'Neill's one that I could actually be proud of.
I watched her grapple, and it was like, okay, we're lunging in for the takedown, and then we're just kind of going, not really positionally sound, just going for the finish, getting the submission. It just didn't really all gel for me when I watched the Casey O'Neill tape to get ready for coming into the UFC. So she was taking on Shayna Dobson, and I thought, well, Dobson just got the win over Agapova. She can last for a bit. She can hang. I know she has a terrible record, but just put yourself in my shoes, and I'm going to talk you through it. Well, Casey O'Neill looked amazing in that fight. So then she took on Laura Procopio, who hung in there with Carol Hossa and had a competitive fight at 135, and Lara's a finisher, and I figured, okay, Lara's going to get it done. And Lara looked good to start that fight. She did, until she ended up getting submitted, and it was pretty weird. And then when Casey O'Neill went to take on Antonina Shevchenko, it was like, okay, all right, I'm firmly entrenched in this one. I think Casey O'Neill's going to get the win. And boy, did she ever get the win against Antonina Shevchenko. And listen, Antonina's not Valentina. We all know this. Pavel knows it. But when it comes to that fight, Antonina's a good kickboxer. When she's set in her way, she's very good. And when she grapples the way that she wants to grapple, Antonina can be good. But Casey O'Neill was all over that fight. And when it comes to a fight like this, that's how it makes it so interesting. Undefeated prospect, under 25, taking on the veteran who's almost 40 years old, 45th pro fight. How do you see this one going?
So in the UFC, there's two different kinds of retirement fights. There's the version of Yair Rodriguez versus BJ Penn, and I understand BJ Penn had like 7 retirement fights before that, but still, there's those fights where it's like, okay, BJ, you're still sticking around, like we're going to beat this out of you, and then you can be on your merry way. And then there's other retirement fights where it's like Little Nog versus Sam Alvey, where it's like, hey, this isn't going to be like a guaranteed win by any means, but let's say you put in the work in your training camp and you're one of the better versions at this stage of your career, then this is a very winnable fight. This is a lot closer to BJ Penn versus Yair Rodriguez than any other one I can think of. Like, I think this is a difficult fight for Roxanne Modafferi.
Yeah, and it's kind of Cain Velasquez and Ngannou, but in a different way, right?
A little bit. It's just, this is my problem with Roxanne Modafferi, and this is a stat that always This is a stat that always really stands out to me. Before she fought Barb Honchak, who she ended up beating by TKO, funny enough, there was a stat that was like, yeah, Roxanne's never got a knockdown in her career. That really worries me. Like, if you're trying to beat Casey O'Neill, you're not going to out-grapple her. You're not going to out-cardio her, out-physique her. Because that's the thing about O'Neill that I do think is an important thing to bring up. She's way stronger than she looks. Like, she's just one of those fighters who has the grip. It's kind of like when you watch Daniel Cormier fight. Like, yes, DC looks strong, but they just flipping people over his head. Casey O'Neill has that kind of grappling strength, squeeze power that we don't normally see just from a random prospect making their way up. Like, I think Casey O'Neill is a very, very unique prospect and a very unique fighter on her way into the rankings, and I do think that if she is able to get this win over Roxanne, this might be one of the worst wins possibly for her in her UFC career, because I really do think that this is one of those fights where it's like, okay, Casey, you're good, and we all know you're good, but when you beat Roxanne, there is not an easy fight for you after that. So we're going to learn a lot about both fighters, well, I guess especially Casey O'Neill, but I do think this will be a fun fight. Like, you know, Roxanne's not just going to think, okay, I'm going to show up for a paycheck, this is my last fight. Like, she is as tough as they come, and I do think she'll make a good account of herself.
If you have a look at women's flyweight right now, Roxanne Modafferi ranked 12th, Casey O'Neill at 15, 14 Manon Fiorot. What? Manon's going to fight for a title. If it's not this year, it's next year. But you look up and down. I mean, Tyler Santos able to get the win over Modafferi and then another one over Joanne Wood. She's ranked 5th. So this is a really good opportunity for Casey O'Neill. I would think we're in the realm of like a Cynthia Calvillo next, which is kind of scary. I mean, it really is. But when I do look at this fight and I look at the odds, Modafferi open to plus 210. She's plus 282. Her only knockdown in the UFC out of all of the fights was against Maycee Barber. That's the only one. The one against, or for Casey O'Neill, the line, she opened to minus 250, minus 369 right now. It's juiced. It's juiced. We have a look at the Topology votes, Matt. I'm going to set the over-under at 90%. What are you going to say? You're going to say over? Oh, barely. 829 total votes, 92% going with Casey O'Neill, 47% by decision, 38% by knockout. For the 8% that are Modafferi, 70% by decision. If you look at it for Roxanne Modafferi, again, hasn't been able to get those wins, but she's only taken on the top of the top level competition in her UFC run. And I'm going to go through it. Lost to Tyler Santos, lost to Viviane Araujo, lost to Lauren Murphy, Jennifer Maia, Sajara Eubanks, Nico Montano. And then outside of the UFC, Jennifer Maia, Vanessa Porto, Raquel Pennington, Barb Honchak, like Rosie Sexton, the doctor. So it really is tough. And again, Roxanne's only ever fought good competition since 2003. Like, somebody should print that on a shirt.
They should.
When it comes to this fight...
I was in kindergarten in 2003. I've lived a lot since Roxanne Modafferi started her MMA career.
I was 9. But when it comes to this fight, Casey O'Neill's got that grappling heavy style that I think can cause problems for Modafferi, who has great jiu-jitsu. It's just, if you can take her down, then you can probably hold her down.
And Corey Anderson taught us one of the most famous lessons in MMA. There's levels to this grappling game, and I do think Casey O'Neill's on another level with her grappling. And the thing with Modafferi is that she's just not that physically strong, so she does have a really hard time defending takedowns when her opponent does get deep into her hips. And if O'Neill is able to get deep into her hips at some point, I think she'll be able to finish the takedown and rain down a lot of ground and pound.
Well, in the words of the future Bellator light heavyweight champ, Matt, saying there's levels to this, we are both going with King Casey O'Neill to bring the win back to Scotland and Australia by way of Las Vegas. And I can't wait for this fight. Let us know down below who you have in this one between Syndicate's own Roxanne Modafferi on the retirement tour. Will it be like Mariano Rivera or even like David Ortiz? Or will the young prospect be able to get the win? I can't wait for this fight and the rest of this card up at the top. Big time bangers that you're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Musical references I could make about this fight at heavyweight. We have a couple of guys that have been around the block. In the Mountain, Jared Vanderaa. Now, the UFC, they're not really pushing that nickname anymore, but Jared Vanderaa is one of the biggest heavyweights you're ever going to see. His last fight, he weighed 265.5 because he's a consummate professional. He didn't have to Greg Hardy it and lose a little bit more weight. He didn't have to Justin Tafa it and fight at super heavyweight. No. Jared Vanderaa, he makes the weight. Now, his Instagram game is a little different. It's a little out there. But when you watch Vanderaa fight, it's blood and guts. I mean, if you saw his fight against Tafa, it was blood and guts, and he was able to get the win there. And listen, his last time out, was he on the losing end? Yeah, I'm asking you a rhetorical question. He lost to Alexander Romanov. And I bet you that Ilir Latifi's somewhere going, damn right I don't have to fight Romanov anymore. I'm excited about that. But you're going to lose to a guy like Romanov. You're going to lose to Sergey Spivak, I guess. But just don't call out Sergey Spivak and then lose that bad. But when it comes to Jared Vanderaa, very positionally sound once he gets into the clinch, and that's what he wants to do. He's going to pound you with uppercuts. He's going to take you down. It's going to be rinse and repeat. And he weighs on a lot of his opponents. And that's how he wins. Is it the most exciting heavyweight style? No, it isn't. Against Tafa, was it a little bit of that and a little bit of the striking? Yeah. And did he get cut open? You're darn tootin' he did. Now, again, the musical references, Matt. Which song is better? The Mountain, the Dierks Bentley song, or any other song by Pitbull?
Before every middle school basketball game, they would play Hotel Room Service by Pitbull. I don't know why. Not really an age-appropriate song for the time. But you're ready to, like, hit three-pointers after that. So I'm going to say anything by Pitbull beats Dierks Bentley.
I don't like Pitbull. And
we got the Hotel Motel Holiday Inn.
This will get lost in the pandemic, and I hope somebody out there gets this reference, but you might not. In the pandemic, Dierks Bentley came out with an entire country comedy album that just did not do well. And it's like everybody forgets about it. But when it comes to this fight, Matt, again, contrasting styles, because for Andrei Arlovski, you look at his record and it's very deceiving. A lot of wins by knockout, but that was really early on in his career. A lot more wins by decision lately. He had that period about 3 or 4 years ago where he was losing to every top contender out there. And then since he's filled in this gatekeeper role, 4-1 in his last 5, and he's kind of been really consistent on a little bit of a heater.
Okay, before, we weren't even recording when I was talking about this, we talked about Brook Lopez earlier today. But Andrei Arlovski, to me, is exactly Brook Lopez. Just bear with me, everybody. Brook Lopez was a star player for the Brooklyn Nets. He was very good. He got a lot of high post-ups, averaged like 20 a game. Then he went to the Lakers, didn't really work out there, and he signed he signed a very cheap deal with the Bucks. He went from being a star player who could do a lot of things, and then he went into a reduced role. The Bucks have other star players. We don't need you to do everything. We just need you to get better at the things that you are already good at, and then find a way to use that and just sort of accentuate those parts of your game. Andrei Arlovski went from being a star player, if you will, a guy at the top of the division who could beat anybody on his best day and outplay anybody on his best day, if you will. Now he's just refined the things that he does very well. He is extremely mobile for a 43-year-old heavyweight that's been knocked out like 17 times.
Happy birthday, too, because a week and a day ago it was his 43rd birthday.
He's 20 years older than me, Craig. It is wild. Like, Andrei Arlovski's been around and done that for a long time. And it is kind of wild because I don't really look at him and think like, wow, I'm really worried for his health every time he's in there. Like, when BJ Penn fights in MMA, I'm going to be honest with everybody. I don't like watching it. He doesn't really fight like the same guy. He's very different. Arlovski still moves in the same manner, though, and I might not pick him every fight, picked against him in his last one, but he still does the same things that sort of got him to the dance all that time ago. But I do like what you brought up, though, about how you look at his record, you see all these knockout wins. It is deceiving. Like, those knockout wins, for the most part, are pre-2011, and then at this stage of Arlovski's career, he is happy to sort of be that elusive, volume-striking heavyweight, but that guy's given a lot of prospects on their way up a lot of trouble these past couple years.
So the 5-on-in for Arlovski, Felipe Lins, former millionaire from the PFL. He beats Tanner Boser by decision, albeit a close fight, but he wins that one. He loses to Tom Aspinall. He beats Chase Sherman. He beats Carlos Felipe. You're not going to see Chase Sherman in the UFC again. You might see Carlos Felipe if you're lucky, but he's away on the USADA sussy. And if you go over to Tai Tuivasa's IG, he made fun of him. He made fun of him. For Vanderaa, the 5-on-in, if we focus in on it, I'm pretty sure Tony Lopez is in it. He is. Harry Hunsucker lost to Spivak, the win to Tafa, and again, he loses to Romanov, but that's water off duck's back.
Who do you think is in more heavyweights like last 5? Czech Congo or Tony Lopez? Because I feel like one of those two guys makes an appearance in every heavyweight fight.
It's Tony Lopez. And Czech Congo, 46, fighting for a title this year.
Doing the damn thing.
Wild stuff. So if we look at the odds for this fight, Arlovski opened a minus 300 favorite. He's a minus 157 right now. Vanderaa opened a plus 250. He's plus 129. I wish I could have got Vanderaa plus 250. And we look at the Topology votes. 732 total votes. 88% Arlovski. 82% by decision. For the 12% that have Vanderaa, 44% by knockout. 46% by decision. I could definitely see Andrei Arlovski going out there winning another decision. I look at the 4 fights that he has for wins lately. Felipe Lins, mobile striker from distance with power. Tanner Boser, in and out striker from distance. Chase Sherman, striker from distance. Carlos Felipe, boxer from distance. Jared Vanderaa doesn't fight like any of those guys, and I know we disagree on this one, and we're going to get into the intricacies of it. I think Jared Vanderaa has a good opportunity to actually get a win here. People are going to disagree with me because I'm in the minority, obviously, and he is the underdog. But I like Jared Vanderaa for the fact that he closes distance. Now, when he closes distance, he eats a lot of shots. Arlovski doesn't hit like he used to. I think Vanderaa is going to go out there, put on the most boring heavyweight fight you've ever seen. He's going to get the win over the former champion who debuted in 98 and got a win over Vyacheslav Datsik. And he's going to call out somebody that he has no business calling out. That's what I see happening. But I do have Vanderaa as the dog in this one.
Here's my only problem with that. Strikers can't close the distance on Andrei Arlovski. So how is a guy who is a poor striker on the outside going to do that? I just don't think he's going to be able to get his arms around Arlovski throughout the fight. And maybe he can, and if he does, it's going to have a lot of success. And he is the bigger guy, like you said. You don't get a nickname like the Mountain at heavyweight by just being a small dude. But Andrei Arlovski at this stage of his career has shown an incredible ability to get his back up or off of the cage, and he moves left to right extremely well for, again, a guy who's 43 years of age who's still fighting in MMA. I don't love picking Andrei Arlovski at this stage of his career, but I do think he'll be able to get a decision win.
Again, Czech Congo's fighting for a title at 46 in the year 2022.
And last point for me, I might not like picking Andrei Arlovski this weekend with his age. Alexis Davis looked pretty good, though, at her age last weekend, so age is just in your head. It's just a number, maybe.
Split on the pick. Matt going with Belarus's own. I think he's actually an American citizen now. We'll have to look into that one and report it back at the end of the week. I've got California's own Jared Vanderaa to get the win. You let us know down below in the comment section who you have. Do you agree? Are you going with the dog, Vanderaa? Or are you going with a guy whose nickname is after a dog, Andrei Arlovski? Big time fights coming up on this card, including between Nasrat Haqparast and Bobby Green. I can't wait for that. Let's keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Really interesting fight coming up this weekend at lightweight. Kicking off the main card portion of the card, we have our second fighter with the nickname of King. It's King Bobby Green. King Casey O'Neill also on this card, taking on Nasrat Haqparast. And listen, he's only 26, but at this point in Nasrat Haqparast's career, he's starting to tread into that Eric Silva category because he only does have 3 losses in the UFC. And he's definitely won more than he's lost. But it's just been a weird run for Nasrat Haqparast. So I'm going to start this video off this way because Bobby Green has been in the UFC for years and years and years. And he's taken on top contenders, reinvented himself, come back again. I mean, you look at it. He lost 2 fights in a row before he was able to retire a la Quinta. And I don't say that lightly, but he lost to Thiago Moises in a fight that he lost the first round. He made it competitive. And then he loses to Rafael Fiziev his last time out. Big time third round rallied in that fight. Then he goes out there and beats Iaquinta in the first round, knocks him out. Now he's taking on Haqparast. Haqparast, when he's been an underdog, he's lost. When he's been a big favorite, he's won. The only fight where he's a big favorite and lost was against Drew Dober. He's about a minus 350 favorite. But my question is to you, Matt. At this point in the game, I know there's so many Fight Night Picks fans that are Nasrat Haqparast fans. I have an uncomfortable question to ask. How much has Nasrat Haqparast developed and evolved? And I'm not just talking about from Nasrat into Kelvin Gastelum, but how much has he evolved since he came into the UFC against Martin Held to the fighter that you see now in front of you?
Not much, but I don't really blame him, and this is the reason why. It's a lot easier to fight Martin Held than it is to fight Dan Hooker, and I just feel like his level of competition has gone up significantly, because if you do look at Nasrat Haqparast's first little run in the UFC, Timo Guti is only mentioned on this channel because you were there and you watched that fight in person. No other person probably knows who that is. So with Haqparast, I do feel like he was the recipient of sort of a light scheduling early on in his UFC career. I just feel like we are sort of seeing the cream rise to the top, if you will, and he isn't having as much success when he does fight the upper levels of competition.
Well, that's it. He comes in, he takes on Martin Held, who was at the top of the Bellator mountain at one point, fighting guys in Lewiston, Maine. Look it up. It really happened. But Haqparast loses that fight, and that's okay. He was coming in, lost his pro debut, won 8 fights in a row, all by knockout, loses to Held by decision, then he gets back on the winning train. Then he takes on Drew Dober, loses by knockout, then he takes on Alexander Munoz, Team Alpha Male coach, and then he gets a win over Rafa Garcia, and then he fights Dan Hooker, and there were so many extenuating circumstances around that fight. I mean, Nasrat had just lost his mother. He was flying between the States and Germany. The whole COVID situation trying to get around. Dan Hooker couldn't get a visa, but then he did. It was a wild, wild series of events. And in that fight, Nasrat had some success with his boxing. Dan Hooker became a wrestler, which is like some mythical figure. It was just a weird run. But the reason I asked that question, Haqparast was knocking guys dead before the UFC. He still looks like the same fighter now. And the weird thing about Haqparast that I just kind of question is he trained at TriStar. He trained in Germany. He trained at Kings. He's all over the place. And then for his last fight coming up against Dan Hooker, I couldn't figure out what gym he was training at. And then there's Firas Zahabi in the corner. It's just, to me, it almost seems like there's too many cooks in the kitchen.
We praise some fighters for doing this, though, and I do feel like that has to be mentioned. There's some fighters we think are amazing because of that same fact.
But not when it's like all over the place. It just, it gets really weird for me, and Nasrat's still a very young prospect. I still think he's one of the better boxers you're going to find at lightweight. It's just, we don't see a ton of leg kicks. We don't see a ton of offensive wrestling. We don't see this big jiu-jitsu aspect of his game that's really evolved. That's the only reason I bring it up. And I say this because I was so high on Nasrat Haqparast at one point that coming into this fight against Bobby Green, it now makes me scratch my head because I thought Nasrat was going to be a force at 155 for a long time. Now that he's had these speed bumps and you're taking on a guy like Bobby Green, it really is tough to try and pick up the pieces. That's all.
I agree 100%, but this also has to be said. Ally Quinta wasn't in that fight to win. At all. I don't think he was.
That was weird. It was a weird fight.
Bobby Green hits him with one shot, puts him down, knocks him out. Al just gave up. Al didn't get knocked out. Al gets hit by one shot, takes a knee. Like, I don't put a lot of stock into Bobby Green's last win, even though I do kind of side towards him in this matchup. I just feel like we have to have a very fresh perspective on both these fighters, because Bobby Green looked really good in his last matchup, and he's had some losses where he's looked good. He's had some wins where he's looked bad, though, and that's the thing about Bobby Green. He always fights to the level of his competition. If they're better than him, he will. If they're worse than him, he will. And that always concerns me, especially in this matchup, because yes, Nasrat hasn't really opened up his MMA skill set as much as maybe we'd like, but Bobby Green's still going in there to box with him this weekend, and he's going to make this Nasrat's fight, and that's what worries me, because even if Bobby Green is the better wrestler, which of course he is, he has the better ground and pound, I'd even say he has the better cardio, because we've seen Bobby Green in some ugly fights where he is still fresh in that third round. I still think for the most part he's going to go out there and box with Nasrat Haqparast. That's a dangerous thing for anybody in this division to do. So I do agree with you, and I do think Green is the better mixed martial artist. I just look at this as one of those fights where he's still going to be doing his opponent's strength no matter what.
For Nasrat Haqparast, his first 4 fights in the UFC, he had 4 knockdowns. Win, lose, or draw, he was able to knock guys down, and then we haven't really seen it out of him lately. Again, he had that win over Joaquim Silva where he knocks him out. That was 2 years and 4 months ago. A win by decision over Munoz where he defended a lot of takedowns and beat him up on the feet. And against Rafa Garcia where, again, Garcia is one of those guys, hot and cold, where is he really at? But when it comes to this fight, it was surprising to me that the odds open at par. Haqparast now a plus 140 underdog, Bobby Green a minus 170 favorite. We talked about it. Fans are behind Nasrat Haqparast. We've seen a lot of that support in the comment section in the past. And if you're one of those fans, let us know down below. But I look at it on Tapology, 767 total votes, 77% Bobby Green, 76% by decision for the 23% that have Haqparast, 80% by decision. If you told me when Fight Night Picks started that Bobby Green would be favored by the fans and the odds makers to beat Nasrat Haqparast, I would have shaken my head and turned the camera off.
Yeah, I probably would have been in the same boat too, but for Bobby Green, like, he was in the top 15 back in 2016, had this weird middle stage of his career where he just sort of fought unranked guys, and now he's kind of back to the fighter that he once was all those years ago. I think he will be able to continue some of that momentum, and here's the fun thing about Green that it hasn't been talked about at all. I think Bobby Green, because he is such a fun fighter, is always a prime candidate to get, like, sort of a star coming off of a bad loss. You know, like, if Dustin Poirier really wants to fight somebody who's not in, like, the top of the division, I could see them doing him versus Bobby Green, too. I could see them doing Tony Ferguson, Bobby Green. Like, he's one of these unranked fighters who has enough of a following just because of his fighting style, and he's got a good personality, too. Like, Bobby Green gives great interviews. I highly recommend watching them. So, I do think he's always that prime candidate for, if there's ever a big opportunity in the horizon, I think Bobby Green could always step into it.
Nasrat Haqparast has great takedown defense, which is something that nobody really talks about because Dan Hooker was able to take him down, and he's a striker. That shouldn't happen. He also has really, really good striking defense as well. So 2 big attributes if you do like Nasrat Haqparast to go along with very, very good output. Bobby Green with great output as well. So it is a really tough fight. I have a hard time with this one. I'm right on the fence. I have Bobby Green right now at the start of the week, but listen, Power Pose on the right-hand side of the screen, who must look at Conor McGregor a lot on Instagram, definitely has a good opportunity in this fight. I'm picking Bobby Green at the start of the week, but I'm right on the edge, and if I switch the pick on question mark kicks, don't be surprised. So right now, start of the week, both of us going with King Bobby Green to get the win over Nasrat Haqparast. Again, let us know down below in the comment section who you have. Big-time fights on this main card. Marcelo Rojo taking on Kyler Phillips. I can't wait for it. Let's keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Potential fight of the night coming up on this weekend's UFC 271 main card. We have the Matrix, Kyler Phillips, looking to avenge his last loss against Raulian Paiva. Very close and controversial fight. He's taking on Pitbull Marcelo Rojo, a guy who, when he wins, does this. And it's weird, and it's not cool, representing Entram Gym. Now, if we go back to pay-per-views of times past, when Brandon Moreno fought Davison Figueiredo, Entram Gym had a bad night. I mean, Silvana Gomez-Juarez got beat, even though she was on her way to winning a fight, and then got caught in a submission. You also had Renato Valdez that got knocked down 6 or 7 times. Really, it was 4 or 5. Mike Beltran wanted blood. And then, as the card went on, Michael Morales was able to get the win. And then Brandon Moreno lost. So overall, the gym went 1-3 on the night. We only have one Entram gym fighter coming up this week, and it's Marcelo Rojo. And if I've ever seen a fighter whose nickname could go from Pitbull to Wildman, it's Marcelo Rojo. And I get it. He lost his last fight to Charles Jourdain. And if you only look at the result on the page and the picture after the fight, you might think, man, this guy sucks. Why is he here? I'm here to tell you why. Because he's an all-action fighter, and whether he wins or whether he loses, he is a lot of fun to watch. And he has fights against UFC-level competition outside of the UFC. You know, I'm talking about Aaron Carter's boxing coach, Jesse Strader. He's got a fight coming up. Exciting stuff. But you look at it, a loss to John Castaneda. Sexy Mexi's coming for that crown at 135. So hot right now at a mini. Who else? I mean, the fight against Levi Saul Marroquin, that was a fun fight. Who else does he have on his record, Matt? A lot of names, a lot of experience. But over with Combate, Marcelo Rojo was the hotness. And you listen to the way that the kind of announcers go through those fights, and listen, they're animated regardless.
They're amazing.
They are amazing. I mean, listen, we're calling the cage La Jaula. Like, I love it. And obviously you would if you're speaking Spanish. But when it comes to Marcelo Rojo, this guy will throw 3 punches to accept 3 punches, and he does it with reckless abandon. And I think a fighter like Marcelo Rojo brings a different wrinkle to a guy like Kyler Phillips, who's so dynamic on the feet, but sometimes there's wasted movement, and he can wrestle. But sometimes when he almost has a guy finished, he wrestles himself into exhaustion, and it happens, right? Sometimes it just happens. I had his last fight as a draw, 10-8 round 1, 10-9 Paiva, 10-9 Paiva. But ultimately for Kyler Phillips, you look at the losses on his record. Victor Henry, that guy's amazing, right? And Raulian Paiva in a fight that could have gone either way, could have even got stopped in the first round. So it really is a tricky one when you wrap your head around it, because there's opportunities and avenues for both of these guys to pull away with impressive wins.
Oh, without a doubt. And for Kyler Phillips, he should win this fight. Like, let's all just say that right now. Kyler Phillips is expected to win this fight.
Now, Matt said this last week about Julian Rosa, right?
And he won. Looked really good. Here's the thing. Marcelo Rojo is by far the steadier guy in this matchup, though. And for me, this is almost like a confidence-boosting fight for Kyler Phillips, because I think he's the more technical guy. I think he's the better wrestler. And I think, honestly, if we just break down at both guys' skill sets, he's probably better at every individual aspect of MMA. He's got good jiu-jitsu. He's got good wrestling. He's a phenomenal striker. But then you look at the intangibles, like you had brought up with Antonina Shevchenko. She's also good at all of her skills, but it's sort of the intangibles that put it all together. I like Kyler Phillips as sort of a similar fighter. Like, he'll have a great moment, and then you'll worry about the next 5 or 10 seconds and the decisions that he does make. But I look at this fight as, if Kyler Phillips shows up the best version of himself, he should be able to counter Marcelo Rojo quite effectively on the back foot, because Rojo and his forward pressure, it is great, and he does have that eat 2 to give 1 style. But unless this fight gets into like deep second, third round, I don't really know how Rojo is going to be able to get a lot of success going early in this fight, because when Rojo fought Jourdain's there to be hit. He throws with a lot more power than Kyler Phillips, but he's also a lot more hittable than Phillips, whereas with Phillips, he'll jump into the pocket, hit you with a big shot, and jump out. Now, when he does get tired, he will start to fade, and that's when Rojo will be able to close the distance and start hitting him with those big flurries. But I do think the first half of this fight is going to be very difficult for Pitbull.
It really is a tricky one, and the reason I bring up that Rosa fight, it was Julian Rosa should win this fight, but oh, by the way, you're taking on Steven Peterson that doesn't like to make weight and shows up for a car crash. Kyler Phillips should win this fight. Marcelo Rojo makes weight. And again, there's an asterisk there because his last fight was on short notice. It was at featherweight, but he's going to be competing at bantamweight. I'm not worried about the weight. But just like Steven Peterson, Rojo's here for a car crash. And listen, Peterson almost finished Rosa at multiple points. I've never seen somebody get a better chin as their career goes on like Julian Rosa.
Andre Arlovski?
He's on like a championship level run right now that I am absolutely here for it. I love watching Rosa fight, just like I love watching Marcelo Rojo fight. So again, just like that Rosa fight, I had him in the question mark kicks parlay at a minus 300, and I've never been so nervous watching a fight as when Julian Rosa was losing moments in that one. But Kyler Phillips here, I mean, he opened as a minus 300 favorite. He's a minus 364. Marcelo Rojo opened a plus 250, plus 275 right now. Tapology votes, I'm going to set the over-under at 80% Phillips. Are you going to think it's over or under?
I think it'll be under.
You're going to think it's going to be under? 93% of 816 total voters going with Phillips. 59% by decision, 28% by knockout for the 7% that of Rojo, 56% by decision, 20% by knockout. Again, this is one that I wouldn't necessarily anchor my parlays with because Kyler Phillips can get hit. He can get tired. Marcelo Rojo is there from round 1 to round 3, and he has wild output.
This is something that does worry me about Rojo, and I'm curious if you do share this sentiment. I think he's going to accept damage worse and worse and worse every time we see him, because I think we saw a sign of that in the Jourdain fight. Like, you're right, he's always had crazy fights like the Jourdain one. Go back and watch some of his fights from before he came to the UFC. They're absolutely insane. But the problem is when you get into fights like a Nick or Nate Diaz, the damage starts to accumulate on you, and the scar tissue does. And those eyes that used to not get swollen when they got jabbed now start to swell. And the scars now open up when they get hit, and they start to form cuts. I just worry that Rojo is starting to enter that stage of his career way earlier than you would like for a guy only making, his second fight in the UFC. So I do worry about Rojo and just the amount of damage he has accepted throughout his career. And I do think that we are starting to see signs of that, especially based on his last performance, because it wasn't like he just got hit by a big shot and fell down because he got knocked out. It was an accumulation of damage to the body and to the head, and I do worry about that stuff moving forward.
It really is a tough one for Marcelo Rojo, and for all of these prospects the UFC is starting to sign that are older than 28. And listen, I mean, I kind of threw the jab out there on Twitter. Dana White on the last episode of Looking for a Fight, he was talking about Trey Ogden, saying the problem with this guy is he's like 30 or 31 years old. But then they've gone out and signed a lot of fighters that are 30, 31 years old plus. So it really is tough for a lot of these guys and gals to get a statement win, cement themselves in the UFC. When you're 30 or 31, you have to be championship level, and you have to go out there and put on really impressive performances if you want to have any semblance of an opportunity at the top 15 and any money at all. If we saw what happened in California, I mean, look at Andrei Fialho on the main card making, what was it, $12K to lose against Michel Pereira. So for Rojo, the time is now. I don't see it for him. I think he's going to lose to Kyler Phillips coming up this weekend. I think Phillips is more well-rounded, and I think that the wrestling is going to win out for him. But like I said earlier in the video, Rojo has the volume, and he has some power in the end of his shot. So he does have a good opportunity here, maybe more than those odds or the fan vote would suggest. So both of us in this one going with Arizona's own Kyler Phillips representing the MMA lab to carry the torch that was held by one Benson Henderson, big win at Bellator, as well as another Arizona guy, Bader, who's going to be taking on 46-year-old Czech Congo coming up in May. Matt, you're not going to want to miss the rest of this main card. Holy smokes, a lot of big-time fights coming up, including the title fight at the top at middleweight, Adesanya Whittaker #2. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Middleweight division right now in 2022 is in a bad place, and a couple of old middleweights, they want to make a dent. We have the Killer Gorilla, Jared Cannonier, taking on Derek Brunson. And listen, as far as gorilla nicknames are concerned lately, the Vanilla Gorillas have really been dropping the ball. Jason Witt got knocked out, Chase Sherman got submitted, and that's just in 2022. And when it comes to this fight for Jared Cannonier, he's 4-1 in his 5-on-in, and his only loss is to Robert Whittaker, who's fighting for a title at the top of this card. So that's all right. If you look at it for the wins, his last fight out, he beat Kelvin Gastelum, who the guy challenging for the title beat as well. Jack Hermanson by finish, Anderson Silva by finish, David Branch by finish. Some of those guys aren't in the UFC anymore, but still quality wins to have on your record. And if you look at it for Derek Brunson, I mean, what a career resurgence this guy's had. Because at one point, a lot of people had written him off as an old middleweight that can only wrestle, that can only get knocked out. And if you look at it in the 5-on-in, Elias Theodorou in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. A win over Ian Heinisch, who they like working on in the back. Dude. A win over Edmund Shabazian by finish. A win over Kevin Holland. And listen, his last time out, he submitted Darren Till, which is not an easy thing to do. I mean, Darren Till at one point was the hotness right now, and I don't know where he is now. He's probably somewhere in Liverpool, if I had to guess. But Matt, when it comes to this fight, both guys can wrestle in different ways, and both guys can strike, but in totally different ways. So really, it's easy to break this fight down because stylistically, they match up so well together, and I'm so excited that we get this fight coming up this
This is
weekend.
my favorite fight of the whole entire card other than the main event. It truly is. Like, Derek Brunson and Jared Cannonier, yes, they're both a little bit older, but I still feel like they're in their primes in MMA. It's not like their recent performances have caused you concern of, oh, they can't actually get to a world title eventually. And how fun would that be? Like, Derek Brunson was the initial stepping stone for Israel Adesanya all those years ago at Madison Square Garden. How cool would that be for Brunson to lose Adesanya all those years ago, work his way back up the division, and then we eventually get that rematch one day? Like, that'd be really, really
Just
fun.
like Marvin Vettori.
Exactly. The thing about Derek Brunson, though, that's been really interesting, especially in this sort of later career resurgence, is that he just relies on his wrestling a lot more, and I'm here for it. I love it, because Derek Brunson relies on that sloppy left hand who puts his chin out, is the Derek Brunson who gets knocked out in spectacular fashion by all of your favorite fighters. We can't roll the clip because we're not Dan Hardy, but still, you get the idea. He's been finished by a lot of people in the UFC, and it's weird with Brunson too, because like Jacare has knocked him out twice. If you told me Jacare beat Derek Brunson twice, I'd probably think, oh, they're about 50-50 on the feet. Brunson probably went for a bad takedown attempt, got submitted, but no, he got head kicked one time, got hit by a massive overhand right the second time. It's just, Derek Brunson's had one of the strangest careers of any MMA fighter going. It is very similar to kind of Bobby Green, who we just talked about on this card.
And even in his second to last fight against Kevin Holland, there were a few spots where he got hit and you went, ooh, this is bad. And then he wrestled.
But that's the good thing. Like, when he got hit against Robert Whittaker, it was, okay, now I'm going for it. Like, oh, I gotta get it back. But now when he gets hurt, it's like, okay, that's fine. I'm gonna use my wrestling, which protects my head, and I'm a very dominant wrestler, and it works out great.
So, we talk a lot about Derek Brunson, the advancements, or maybe not even the advancements, just the tweaks and changes he's been able to make at Sanford MMA, because he's already a guy with that wrestling background coming into MMA. He's always known as a wrestler, but then a power puncher too. So Henry Hooft and company, they've really been able to gel everything together. For Jared Cannonier, out of Alaska, this guy's had the weirdest run, I think, of anybody in the UFC in recent memory. I mean, heavyweight, losing to Sean Jordan, just like Derek Lewis, who's on this card. Then we have fights at light heavyweight. We're only losing to the best guys. Then we come down to middleweight, and it's just scorched earth until he loses his second to last fight. And so you go through it. I mean, Cannonier losing to Whittaker, it is what it is, but you look at his overall game and we talk about it. They strike, but they strike in different ways. If we're talking leg kicks out of these two guys, one of them does it like no other middleweight. I mean, man.
One of them stopped Anderson Silva in Brazil with a leg kick. And with Jared Cannonier, it's weird. He is a very good striker. He is built as a striker, but he rarely outstrikes other pure strikers. Like, Jared Cannonier is a great example of a guy who forces a wrestler to then become a striker, and then he takes advantage of them not doing their primary mixed martial art. And that's why I think this fight is so interesting, because Cannonier is, of course, the better striker than Derek Brunson. He just does a lot more on the feet. But Brunson's wrestling, at least in this stage of his career, has just been so dominant at this weight class that if he does get Cannonier down even one time, I think it is going to force Cannonier to become much more hesitant on the feet as a result.
It's going to be really, really difficult when it does come to this fight. I mean, we look at it so far, both guys will be offensive with their wrestling. I mean, Jared Cannonier, you're less likely to see it, but he is accurate enough when he needs to go for his wrestling takedowns. He doesn't do it very often, and I really doubt we see it against Derek Brunson. Decent takedown defense on his side. Some of the best takedown defense ever out of Derek Brunson. Like, Kamaru Usman has good takedown defense. Derek Brunson, 94% takedown defense. He's been in the UFC for, like, we're getting into the decade region for Derek Brunson. So it's wild to see that. And Cannonier, for his part, he's been around for a very long time as well. You just might not think about it. So when we do look at the odds for this fight, it was a little bit of a surprise to me. And Cannonier open to minus 135 favorite. He's a minus 182 average on best fight odds. For Brunson, open to plus 115. He's a plus 150. If we have a look on Topology for the total votes, surprise us it is to you, Matt. Cannonier's the favorite, so I set my over-under at, I'm going to say 60% Cannonier.
I think it'll be 60-40 Brunson.
Look at that. I mean, wow. 867 total votes, 52% Cannonier, 73% by knockout. For the 48% that have Brunson, 74% by decision. So the odds continue to shift in favor of Jared Cannonier. The fan vote's really close. So, I mean, listen, are you surprised that more fans don't see, I guess, the avenue of a finish for Derek Brunson in this one?
Well, Craig, I'm a bit of a gambling man myself, and I'm not going to lie, I'm kind of happy he is the underdog right now. I look at this fight as a massive opportunity for Derek Brunson to get that chance back at fighting Robert Whittaker and fighting Israel Adesanya. Jared Cannonier is a phenomenal middleweight, and he's really shown an evolution in his game by moving down in weight, because there's something else that has to be said. Like, we gave Jared Vanderaa credit for making a weight class he normally makes. Jared Cannonier was a heavyweight, and a pretty big one at that, and now he's one of the most muscular fighters on the roster, because he's just been able to get into the best physical shape as possible, and that means something. Like, no one can say Jared Cannonier isn't like a dedicated guy. You know, like, that takes a wholesale change in your life to be able to go down that much in weight. But I still think the wrestling of Derek Brunson is going to open up a lot of his strikes on the feet. And I really do think that this is one of those fights, similar to what we saw against Darren Till. He took Till down one time, beat him up with ground and pound, down and then submitted him. He might not be able to get the submission as quick against Cannonier as he did against Till, just because Cannonier is a lot stronger than Darren Till is at this weight class. But I do like Brunson's ability to just control this fight on the mat.
It really is a tricky one, and when it comes down to it, I mean, for Derrick, Brunson can mix it up on the feet for sure. Obviously, those knockout losses kind of weigh heavy in the back of your mind against a guy like Cannonier.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how those leg kicks play out, because Jared Cannonier can switch stances quite well. Odd to see middleweight training at MMA Lab. Usually have a lot of fighters in the lower weight classes. I think it makes a big difference. It's just going to be tricky for me against a southpaw like Brunson. Again, you go for that leg kick. Derrick Brunson has a lightning left hand. That really does open it up. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I like Derrick Brunson in this fight as well with the wrestling. I think Cannonier has great takedown defense, and when it's up against the cage, he can normally have a lot of success. I just see it being very difficult for him against Brunson. So maybe it's against my better judgment, but both of us going with the underdog in this fight in Derrick Brunson. Are we crazy?
Will you change your pick based on his hairstyle? If he's
it's
blonde, do you like him a little bit more?
If he's blonde, I like him a little bit more. We'll have to wait and see. Matt, Super Dave Osborne, myself, both of us going with Derrick Brunson in this fight. You let us know down below who you have. Is it back to the crystals for Cannonier, or is it blonde hair, don't care, Derrick Brunson to get the win? You let us know down below. Big time middleweight fight up at the top. I mean, listen, with a win, one of these guys could get a title shot. Because listen, Sean Strickland was all right against Jack Hermanson, but that fight doesn't get you a title shot. Sean Strickland's talking about S and some D to get his title shot. So for me, I'm really looking forward to the fight up at the top of this card. Listen, keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Absolute banger. Coming up this weekend, UFC 271. It's the co-main event between the former title challenger, both fully and interim, Derrick Lewis, fighting at home against one Bam Bam Tai Tuivasa. And for Tai Tuivasa, absolute career resurgence. It feels like something that we've said before for Derrick Lewis once, twice, 3 times. But for Tai Tuivasa, he was on a tidy little 3-fight losing streak, and now all of a sudden, 4-fight win streak, wins over Stefan Struve, Harry Hunsucker, Greg Hardy, and his last time out over Augusto Sakai, where he showed good clinch control as well as range finding abilities. And listen, Tuivasa's really switched it up. And the thing that surprised me getting ready for this fight was the fact that I figured, okay, we're at Lions High Performance Center again in Australia. We're rocking, we're rolling, hanging out with the crew. No. The weird thing about Tuivasa was the fact that he had the fight before Augusto Sakai, where he picks up a really nice win over Greg Hardy. But then the way back to Australia was difficult, so he made himself a team in Abu Dhabi. And that team was able to get him the win against Augusto Sakai, where he looked like a relatively fresh fighter. Like, he added some wrinkles into his game.
Augusto Sakai certainly didn't.
Augusto Sakai regressed. That much is true. So I really tried to find interviews, and I saw one from December. He's talking about being in Abu Dhabi, and then I pieced it together. Well, his last fight was in December. So then I found one in early January after the fight where he's talking to Ariel Helwani on the MMA Hour. And he's back in Abu Dhabi, and the whole camp's focused around Thai. So I think that without those distractions, that can be a great thing for him. So it's interesting that way. Now, he was drinking beer in the interview, which it is what it is, especially for a heavyweight. But for Tuivasa, I mean, this has been really, really impressive. I mean, from almost being out of the UFC, the rumors that he was cut and whatnot, to being on this win streak, it's amazing. For Derrick Lewis, again, you got to build yourself back up after Cormier. You pick up some big wins. I mean, hell, he beat Francis Ngannou. You can never take that one away from him. He loses to Cyril Gane at home in Houston. And then his last time out in December, fights another prospect in Chris Daukaus and is able to get the win. That one in Vegas. The weirdest part for me, Matt, before I hand it off to you, and there's a lot of different ways to go about this, but for Derrick Lewis, he's fought at home in Houston before. He's fought in Texas before, but specifically in Houston, he's 5-1. The one loss is to Cyril Gane. He went on to the MMA after that, MMA Hour after that fight, and was saying to Ariel Helwani, I don't even want to experience that ever again. It was too much pressure. Too much pressure, too much. And then he followed it up by saying, to the point I was really calling people up. Let me get some weed off them so I can relax my nerves on the fight day. It was too much pressure. Weird.
I don't know what the laws around that are in Texas.
Because this fight's going to be in Houston as well. So I just wonder how that plays in. Because he was able to win 5 fights in a row in Houston. The last of which I believe was Ilir Latifi, which was a close enough fight. And then he had that title fight against Gane. But we've seen that out of Lewis, where in some fights, it's just like, that's the way it is.
I'm going to sound like a dick right now, but fighter makes excuse after loss. It happened. Here's the thing about Derrick Lewis. He is going to lose very badly every now and then. Like against Mark Hunt, he looked terrible. He looked like his back broke 6 times in that fight. Then he got TKO'd by a guy who was like 41 years old. And it was a very, very bad performance. And that's one of those like career, maybe not altering, but career shifting performances. Because it's like, okay, you got the big opportunity, but you look that bad. Are you ever going to build yourself back up? And I do like what you said. He's had that opportunity and he has been able to build himself back up. Like Derrick Lewis to me is like Joel Embiid. Like we had a lot of promise in him. Yeah, he failed here and there, but like at least he works really hard and tries to get better and doesn't make excuses for it. And that's what you like to see. Like in MMA, all we can ask fighters to do is just try to be better, fight in and fight out. And there's not an ounce of me that thinks Derrick Lewis doesn't try to be a better fighter in between every single fight, because even at 37 years of age, his birthday is
this week,
tomorrow, then it should be like he's got an improved wrestling game. He has a better gas tank at this stage of his career. Like there are parts of his game you could directly point to and say those things have improved. With Tai Tuivasa, it's interesting because to me, and maybe you have seen something different, I still feel like he does a lot of the same stuff. It's a make or miss league with Tai Tuivasa in my mind. To me, I just feel like if he lands the shot, it's going to look great. But he does, like, for being such a technical striker, he does leave himself very open on his power punches, and he does wing massive hooks to the point where if he does miss one of those big hooks and leaves himself overextended against a guy like Derrick Lewis, that's when Lewis throws one of those big uppercuts up the middle, gets you up against the cage, and then just starts bombing on you. So I think this could be a weird fight because A, it's heavyweights and these guys are both knockout artists. So like Tai Tuivasa could win via knockout 3 seconds in. Same thing vice versa. I really do think Derrick Lewis is by far the more skilled fighter in this one.
It's really weird. So I mean, for Tuivasa, the trouble, and I guess the good part about it, is that he was so wild. And that's what got him to the dance. That's what got UFC fans behind him. The Shui was cool, and then he started losing because he was overextending himself. And I mean, even go back to the JDS fight. There's points in that fight where he totally overextends. He like ends up down on a knee. JDS lets him back up to fight some more.
And I know you're going to get to this with him training his camp, but he did do it against Sakai too.
No, I mean, if you do look at it, like the last 4 fights, again, he knocks out Stefan Struve in the fight, then he jumps on the cage, hits him with his heel, and knocks him out again. People kind of forget about that. Knocks out Harry Hunsucker, who's done in the UFC. He's 0-2, knockout losses. Beats Greg Hardy by knockout, and one of those ones where Greg Hardy felt it coming on.
He got hurt, though, and that's the thing that I think we should bring up.
He got hurt, and then he goes out there, and I really did like the fight against Sakai, and this is the reason why. It actually doesn't have anything to do with the striking. I'm really surprised that in the clinch work, Augusto Sakai wasn't able to really do anything. And that is a part where Augusto Sakai, you might not believe me, go back a few years ago, Augusto Sakai used to have really, really good clinch work. Not just like when Blagoy's taking him down and he grabs the fence a few times. No, Augusto Sakai, once upon a time, had really good clinch work. And in the fight against Tai Tuivasa, they reverse position a lot. It might not be the most entertaining thing to go back and watch. I really did like to see that out of Tuivasa, to say, okay, this is a guy that was a primary striker against Sergey Spivak. Spivak just took him down. And I think Sergey today could still take Tai Tuivasa down. But with strategic matchmaking, I don't have to worry about that as much against Derrick Lewis. So when it comes down to this fight, if you're really putting in the nuts and bolts and really trying to decipher this one, Tai Tuivasa marches forward. Derrick Lewis baits guys in with counters to knock them out. Tai Tuivasa throws wicked leg kicks. Derrick Lewis stands upright and takes leg kicks and doesn't check them all that great. So, Derrick Lewis, tons of power, improves fight over fight in ways that you might not even be able to quantify, but you know that it's there.
He throws wheel kicks, guys.
He throws wheel kicks, and when he goes forward, which Derrick Lewis will go forward,
he's got life.
He throws left high kicks a lot too, which is kind of weird. But when it comes down to this one, if we do have a look at the odds, Lewis open to minus 146 on best fight odds is an average. He's a minus 190. Tai Tuivasa open to plus, we'll call it 125. He's plus 155 right now. Houston at home, over under, Matt. I'm going to say 75% Lewis.
I was going to say that. I'll say over.
Ooh, look at that. 824 total votes, 74% Lewis, 88% by knockout. For the 26% that have Tuivasa, 81% by knockout. I know I set it up very one-sided, which doesn't normally happen with Fight Night picks. I think Derrick Lewis has a great opportunity this weekend to knock out Tai Tuivasa.
And I think he flatlines him. I really do. Tai Tuivasa doesn't accept pressure all that well, and that's what does worry me about this fight for him. When he's moving forward, he is a great striker because he can do everything on his own terms. But if Derrick Lewis does back up Tai Tuivasa at all, we're going to see a very similar fight, I think, to the JDS one. Because Tuivasa, again, when things are on his terms, he can excel in that type of a fight. But when he is the one who sort of has to be... force him to become a cerebral fighter because that's not Tai Tuivasa's sort of factory default mode. I think Derrick Lewis can get the win that way. And here's the thing too. Picked against Derrick Lewis in his last fight. We remember the result of that, so I'm certainly not doing it again.
I had Derrick Lewis to beat Chris Daukaus. I got laughed at by the commenters, but in this fight, I've got Tai Tuivasa. I really do think leg kicks are a major factor, and when it comes to the new Tuivasa, the trouble is when a guy all of a sudden becomes technical and then something goes wrong and we have to change the game plan, usually those people revert to just brawl, and that's not good against a guy like Derrick Lewis, especially when Lewis baits you in, and Tai Tuivasa gets him up against the fence. But again, the flip of the coin, the reason why I have Tuivasa, picking your shots, clinching, making this a little boring, backing up, throwing leg kicks, whipping your wicked left hook out there. I think Tuivasa, especially being a southpaw in this matchup too, poses different problems for Lewis. And listen, Daukaus just marched into those shots.
Here's something that we haven't talked about though. I think Derrick Lewis, and I'm being dead serious, is going to march across the cage and shoot a double leg takedown.
I don't think it's going to happen.
That was his gameplay when he fought Francis Ngannou. Like, he went into that fight saying, okay, the second that guy takes a step forward, I'm going to shoot a takedown. It didn't happen, but if there's ever another fight in the UFC to have that type of a game plan, it would be this weekend against Tai Tuivasa.
If that happens, I will shoot hot sauce on the fight companion that you can tune into. It's the main card, UFC 271. You can find that here on YouTube. Let us know down below in the comment section who you have in this fight. Malkoun with Derrick Lewis. I've got Australia's own Tai Tuivasa representing the South Sydney region. Big time fight coming up. And we also have a big time main event between Robert Whittaker and Israel Adesanya. It's the second fight. Adesanya looking to retain that belt. I can't wait for it. Let's keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Big time rematch coming up in the main event this weekend, UFC 271. As always, one half your host into Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. You can find the channel at Fight Night Picks. You can find the man to the left, but it's your right, at Matt Allen FNP. That's not his name, it's Matt Allen. And if this is the first time that you've joined Fight Night Picks, hey, we just reached 30,000 subscribers thanks to you guys. And listen, we're going to make this one of the best cards coming up this weekend. We have question mark kicks 2 hours before the prelims. We have a fight companion for the main card. It's called the Fight Night Picks companion that you can check out here. Having said that, we have great fights all throughout this card, a lot of really good prospects, but in the main event, it's a rematch for the middleweight title. Israel Adesanya, Robert Whittaker. Since the last time these guys have fought, it's interesting because for Adesanya, he's had 4 fights. For Whittaker, he's only had 3. But for Whittaker, wins over Darren Till, a win over Jared Cannonier, a win over Kelvin Gastelum. For Israel Adesanya, yeah, he's got a win over Yoel Romero in one of the most forgettable fights ever. He's got a win over Paulo Costa that, from what I heard the other day, apparently it totally changed Paulo Costa. They said that on the UFC broadcast, which was a little interesting because I thought he looked pretty good in his last fight, even though he lost.
He showed up 20 pounds overweight.
That was bad. However, Adesanya has a loss on his record, up at 205 against Jan Blachowicz, and that's what makes it really interesting. He was able to get the win his last time out, but coming into this fight, I mean, he has the momentum. He's still the greatest middleweight. It's just a little bit, things are different now, I should say.
And it feels like the storyline really has been set up to Israel hasn't looked as good since the first Whittaker fight, and I don't know if you've seen how good Whittaker's looked lately, but I gotta be completely honest, and if you disagree, please let me know. I know they've been billing this rematch as we have new versions of these fighters. I think we still kind of have the same Robert Whittaker, and we still have the same Israel Adesanya. Now, yes, both guys know more about their opponent, and honestly, I do think that knowledge will favor Robert Whittaker because he is the more mixed martial artsy out of these two fighters. But I think that's such a strange narrative to bring into this fight. And I understand you have to sort of sell a rematch in a different way. But, like, if you've watched Robert Whittaker's last 3 fights, he still strikes on the outside in, like, a weird karate stance, even though he's boxing heavy. He still finishes most of his combinations with kicks, either to the leg, body, or head. He still has really good movement on the outside. Like, other than the takedowns that we saw at the end of the Kelvin Gastelum fight, he really hasn't shown me that much, at least, of like, oh, we have this new and improved Robert Whittaker. And I always go back to this fight when you're talking about two primary strikers, but one of the striker has, some wrestling and some grappling. When Mark Hunt fought Junior Dos Santos, Mark Hunt's one of the greatest kickboxers ever. Like, he is. He's a great pure kickboxer, fought in Pride, fought in K1, great kickboxer. Junior Dos Santos is a striking-based MMA fighter. He goes in there and boxes with his opponent. But we all know that JDS has the other areas in his game to go to if he really wants to. But he still fought Mark Hunt as a kickboxer, and that fight was very close. And I understand JDS wheel kicks him in the third round as a wild finish, but that fight is a lot closer than it probably should have been, just because stylistically those guys matched up with each other so well. You take that fight, and then you look at this one. Well, Israel Adesanya is about as good of a pure kickboxer as you can possibly be in MMA. And yes, he's a good grappler. Like, I hate it how anytime you say anything about a popular fighter, it gets blown out of context no matter what. Like, if you say he's a really good striker, then all of his fans are like, hey, bro, he can defend takedowns too. Like,
I got in trouble last weekend. I said Sean Strickland was good at defending takedowns, and I got told, no, he's not. And then he defends 6-6 against Jack Hermanson.
It's just, like, these guys are fighting for a UFC title. They're both good at everything. But I do think Israel Adesanya has had a very smart progression of how do I take my kickboxing skills and apply them to MMA. Because, like, there's a reason Combat Sambo is such a good background for MMA. It's the martial art that's rules are the closest to mixed martial arts. They allow takedowns, they allow strikes. It's a very similar kind of point system too. Israel Adesanya figured out, okay, how can I make the most of my pure striking skills? So he developed really good initial takedown defense, a really good first move off of the ground if he does hit the mat. But if you hold him there, we've seen in the Jan Blachowicz fight, you can hold him on the ground. It's very Alexander Gustafsson-ish, because I noticed this early on in his career, and I felt like I can pat myself on the back for it, where Gustafsson has good initial takedown defense, he has that good first move up to his feet, but if you can get him down and really secure the takedown, I guess would be the term, then he does have a really hard time at getting back up to his feet. The difference though between Israel Adesanya fighting like a Martin Vettori in his last matchup, where that could have been a problem, and a Robert Whittaker, is that Whittaker might be faster than Vettori, and he's a much bigger threat on the feet, but I don't think he has the control ability on the mat to really make great use of a takedown if he is able to complete one.
It's one of those ones where you look at Whittaker, and I mean, he might go at a takedown a little bit differently than maybe an American wrestler would. I'm going to go deep on a high single leg, pick a guy up, throw him down. I'm going to go really lock my hands, double leg, take my time.
He uses his athleticism very well.
He does use his athleticism well, and the weird thing about Whittaker is it carries as the fight goes on. A lot of guys, they go for that early. If it doesn't work, I mean, boom, there it is. And now Whittaker's a sitting duck with his striking. He's not like that. That's why this fight's happening. And when it comes to a division that's very stagnant, these guys are incredibly dynamic and continue to secure wins against the upper echelon. I mean, I'm looking at Derek Brunson, Jared Cannonier on this card and going, man, I hope one of these guys doesn't have a super impressive performance, because that title fight is going to be really boring, whether it's against Adesanya or Whittaker, or when it comes to, again, Sean Strickland, Jack Hermanson. Like, that's the level of middleweight we're talking about right now. You can get a little long in the tooth right now at middleweight, still have success, which, again, 5 years ago you could have too. Like, Bisping fought Henderson for a title. So, listen, stranger things have happened, but when it comes to this matchup, Adesanya, yeah, we've seen him tested in the takedown abilities. Against a guy like Jan Blachowicz, it was rinse and repeat. And the thing that you didn't like to see out of Adesanya in that fight was once he got held down, he just kind of accepted the position.
I also didn't like how he would throw feints, but nothing behind them. Like, Joe Rogan loves an Israel Adesanya feint. We all do. Like, if you watch enough MMA, you understand why a feint is so important. It's like a jab step in the NBA. Like, you're putting false information in your defender's mind, and you're trying to capitalize on that. With Adesanya, he can do that on the feet, he can do that on the mat, but the issue is, it's like he's getting the ball, he's in that triple threat stance, he's just jab stepping like Carmelo Anthony. If you never shoot, then no one's ever going to respect that initial drive. And with Adesanya, he hasn't let his hands go as much in his last two fights. So let's see where our big Robert Whittaker supporter, that's definitely something you can look to and give a little bit of confidence in the Whittaker side of things, because Adesanya, his fight against Vettori wasn't very good. Like, that wasn't a great MMA fight. And you would say about Yoel Romero, like, that was a forgettable title defense, but if we're being honest, so was the Martin Vettori one. And Adesanya's really only had one super impressive performance in his last 4, but that's why I think we are going to see the best version of him this weekend against arguably his biggest rival, because these guys don't really talk, shit back and forth like him and Paulo Costa did, but they're so well respected in the MMA community that I do think Whittaker and Adesanya realize how much of a threat to each other's legacy that they both are, and I do think that they bring out the best version of each other.
So when we look at the odds for this fight, Robert Whittaker open a plus 220 favorite. He's still roughly there. Adesanya somewhere around a minus 275. We look at the Tapology votes. Surprise to us as they are to you. 935 total votes, 73% Adesanya, 58% by decision, 33% by knockout. For the 27% that have Whittaker, 69% by decision, 22% by knockout. And for Whittaker, again, he can wrestle, he can box. Jake Matthews from Australia, he can wrestle, he can box, right?
This is my last point that I wanted to bring up. I could see a world where Robert Whittaker knocks out Israel Adesanya, similar to how Shogun knocked out Lyoto Machida in their second fight. Remember how close their first fight was? It was a very controversial decision. Lyoto Machida wins a unanimous, but it was close. A lot of people thought Shogun won. Shogun comes out in the second fight, hits him with like a weird overhand right, kind of on the temple, but like high on the head, and just flatlines him and gets into mount. Like, it's one of those weird power punches that if it's just like a guy coming off Contender Series, you probably don't think that they can land that type of a shot. But if it's a Robert Whittaker or a Shogun Hua, they have that kind of power at any stage of the fight.
I definitely think, again, there's avenues for both of these guys to win the fight. The thing that I like out of Adesanya is whether it's switching stances. We talked about this. I seem to talk about it in every Whittaker fight. It's the end of the combinations. You can almost predict where he's going to end up. And when you have a striker like Israel Adesanya, it's a kick, it's a hook, it's a straight punch. He can really get it done in all of these different dynamic ways. So it does scare me a little bit where Adesanya, again, it's going to be marketed as he's not unbeatable anymore. He's 21-1. He's not 21-0. Habib was undefeated. John Jones has...
Habib is undefeated.
Habib, sorry, is undefeated. I was already going on to my next point. John Jones... That Matt Hamill fight doesn't count. So Israel Adesanya, he's lost.
I just like in the back of your mind, you're like, Khabib's not undefeated because he hasn't faced me.
No, I mean, I did face off with Habib, and his head's like 3 of mine. But I'm taller than him, so I got that. But Matt, when it does come down to this fight, I have Israel Adesanya in the rematch, but it does scare me again as like an anchor to a parlay. Do I have that confidence in him? Not necessarily.
I want to disagree with you, but I don't think I can. Like, Israel Adesanya, or no, I am going to slightly disagree with you. I actually like the odds for Adesanya, if I'm being completely honest. I don't think Robert Whittaker can knock him out on the feet, and I think that's his only chance of winning this fight, because it's hard to outpoint a guy who moves so well on the feet like Adesanya, because he's so elusive in those later rounds if you're not able to secure a takedown, and no one has been a bigger fan of, like, tough smashes. Oh, this is just like a random guy at welterweight. Wow, this guy's really good at middleweight. Like, it's been fun to see the career progression out of Robert Whittaker. I just think stylistically he's run into, like, his kryptonite basically at the top of this division in Adesanya.
It will be an amazing fight coming up this weekend. Matt had a Super Day performance. I'm looking forward to it. Both of us going with Israel Adesanya in this one. But you can make a great case for either fight down below in the comments section. So let us know who you have. Let us know what you make of the thumbnail, because for the individual thumbnail on this video, it's going to be a lot of fun. We threw it out there to the community on Instagram up there, but also YouTube community tab, very active over there. So look out for those polls, look out for the graphics and all sorts of fun stuff. Question Mark Kicks live 2 hours before the prelims here on the channel, as well as the Fight Night Picks companion for UFC 271, where you can hang out and have a lot of fun with us. I'm really looking forward to the card coming up this weekend. You're not going to want to miss any of it. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.